massively significant carbon savings too.
A multi-regional Hyperloop network could become a replacement for both short-haul passenger and cargo flights and traditional ground transportation, both of which are significant carbon producers.
One Hyperloop-connected distribution hub, perhaps at an airport that is predominantly used for international air freight, replacing maybe 10, 12, 15 distributed road hubs. It takes a lot of polluting and inefficient truck haulage off the roads. That itself means roads gain extra capacity.
Hyperloops will still need to use electricity to both move pods and maintain the near-vacuum environment in the tube. Proponents of the technology believe that this can be done by using renewable sources, including a combination of solar panels and battery technology that could be used along the Hyperloop itself. But even with all multipliers of time and carbon emission savings that a Hyperloop network may provide, the investment capital required to actually build such a network becomes even more economically and politically daunting.
Committing doesn't mean spending billions on day one. Committing means, how do we phase it?
One company in the Netherlands is working to develop that technology, and perhaps more importantly, the international coalition needed to make the Hyperloop network a reality.
So we are here in Europe's first full-scale Hyperloop test facility, where we can already prove every conceptual technology of the Hyperloop.
This is Tim Houter, a co-founder and CEO of Hart Hyperloop, headquartered in the city of Delft. And while this testing tube might not seem as large as others, inside is a key technology to create the on- and off-ramp type infrastructure of a Hyperloop network. That is, a lane switch.
That's something we can already test here. You can actually see it here, that a track is diverging from one track into two. That makes it possible to eventually split up the Hyperloop track in two sections. And in that sense, you can create a complete Hyperloop network that in the end will make it possible to travel, for example, over a whole continent. And take Europe, for example, with the same ease as you can now travel with a metro in a city.
The nice thing about this magnetic levitation system that we've developed is that there's absolutely zero moving components in the track. So for example, if you have to do a lane switch, all you do is that the tube basically splits up, and statically the tracks also split up. And whenever the vehicle enters a switch, it either pulls itself to the right with its magnets, or it pulls itself to the left with its magnets.
Lane switching on traditional rail requires the physical movement of the rail. Even modern magnetic levitation tracks use lane switching techniques in order to transfer trains from one track to another.
And this is a very crucial element, because this is the thing that limits the capacity and, in the end, the usefulness of the rail network. Because the moment that a track is switching, that means that at that moment you are creating an unsafe environment for the trains behind it. So you need a lot of space between trains. In a Hyperloop, because you have no moving components in the track, all the vehicles can be much closer to each other. You can achieve a very high frequency and basically have your vehicles moving and merging in and out of the network very much like a highway.
For now, though, Hart's physical testing has been limited by the size of their tube. Because the test track is only 30 meters long, they haven't tested this lane switch at speeds greater than 20 kilometers per hour. However, the company is working to build a new test site where it plans to increase that testing speed to 300 kilometers per hour.
We're now in a phase where we have proven most of the most important technologies in the test facilities that we already have. And we have also demonstrated the viability and the feasibility of a network. If you look at all the subsystems that it consists of, most of those are proven systems, already demonstrated in lab conditions. So we don't really believe that the technology itself is going to be the biggest challenge.
Because for all Hyperloop companies out there, actually building a Hyperloop system requires more than just a good product.
We're talking about the safety aspects, we're talking about integration into the environment, we're talking about the social aspects. Do people feel comfortable traveling in such a system? So it's about all these different aspects, and the complexity is really getting all the different stakeholders that are relevant and that do need to contribute to bring this to market, to get them all following the same roadmap.
In order to help build this coalition of private and public interest in Hyperloop development, HART in 2018 partnered with other Hyperloop companies from Europe and Canada. The goal was to define, establish, and standardize the framework to regulate Hyperloop systems.
Right now we are working with all the Hyperloop developers together in setting up the first, structure for starting the standards drafting.
One of the most important goals for HART is interoperability, which is essentially making sure the different systems can communicate with each other.
Interoperability is so important because what we want to achieve is actually have this seamless travel experience. So you don't want to end up, for example, going from Madrid to Paris and then switching because you need to use a different technology to get, for example, to Amsterdam.
The idea being that as companies around Europe create the first commercial Hyperloop tracks between individual cities, one day those can all be connected to a larger network.
Everyone that believes that Hyperloop is a future transport system also realizes that there is a need to have this network because that's where Hyperloop thrives.
Hyperloop is such a huge project. It's definitely not something that you can do on your own or as a single company. So you need to do it with a lot of other companies. You need to have the governments. I think in that sense, the biggest challenge that we've encountered is to really get all the required parties together to take the steps in development and in commercial implementation.
HART's next plan is to build the European Hyperloop Center, an open testing facility which will include a 2.6-kilometer test track. And the company hopes to test travel speeds there at up to 700 kilometers per hour. Virgin Hyperloop is also racing to construct the first commercial Hyperloop route, with projects in various states of development in India, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. Recently, the company announced plans to build a Hyperloop certification center in West Virginia, which will include a 6-mile-long test track. Proving the technology here will be crucial if Hyperloop networks can find a home among infrastructure investments that the Biden administration hopes to make.
The idea that there's multiple Hyperloop companies, I think, is a redeeming aspect in the business. People really want to see something happen, so having multiple people move forward is good for that.
I was struck when Josh and Sarah rode the pod. 2 or 3 of the major outlets used the phrase, "We now have a new mode of transport." And although all of that technology had existed before those 2 human beings rode it, it was the moment at which those 2 human beings traveled that short distance down the tube that in popular imagination, Hyperloop became a mode of transport.
The metaphor I use with my team is that, the Wright brothers were first, but none of us fly on Wright Brothers Airlines anymore. If you don't continue to innovate, you're not going to be around, and so we'll continue to be at the forefront of building Hyperloop.
Back in 2013, Elon had an idea. I think the difference now in 2021 is some brilliant engineers have spent real time grinding out the details. And I thoroughly expect the next 3 to 5 years to be decisive.
This week, how hydrogen can transform our energy usage. We'll look at why the universe's most abundant element could be a game changer in the climate revolution.
Hydrogen technologies are not new. They are used in other sectors. We use them in space, on our rockets, and we don't need the laws of physics to change to be able to use hydrogen on our planes.
From iron ore to green hydrogen, one of Australia's richest men tells us about his pivot to sustainable energy.
Let's take action. It's practical, it's implementable. Let's do it now.
Plus, the hydrogen revolution. We'll speak with the CEO of Italian utilities firm Snam about his new book and how green hydrogen could be competitive within 5 years.
Costs are coming down and people are waking up to the fact that it's the only way to decarbonize certain sectors.
From Bloomberg's global headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and this is Bloomberg Green. It's a new year, so here at Bloomberg Green, we're highlighting new solutions in the fight against climate change. And one of those is as old as the universe itself: hydrogen. It's the simplest element around, but could well be a game changer when it comes to turning around our dependence on fossil fuels. Today, hydrogen is used in the chemicals industry to produce petroleum products. It's also starting to be used in steel production, an industry under a lot of pressure to decarbonize. But it has far more uses as well, from powering cars to heating our homes. And Bloomberg New Energy Finance sees a seismic shift in the sector in the next 10 years as green hydrogen squeezes out dirtier alternatives. So-called gray hydrogen dominates today. But as renewable electricity gets cheaper and more accessible, so will green hydrogen. In this week's edition of Bloomberg Green, we'll explore what this push into hydrogen means for tackling climate change. We'll hear from Australian billionaire Twiggy Forrest about his pivot from iron ore to hydrogen, and we'll also speak with the CEO of Italian utility company Snam about his book, The Hydrogen Revolution. But first, what are we using hydrogen for? And why does it actually matter? Christine Lee Edwards explains.
Hydrogen, the most plentiful element in the universe. On Earth, we find it mostly bonded to oxygen in the form of water, or in other gases known as hydrocarbons. Hydrogen gas, H2, burns hot and clean, making it an attractive tool in the race to net zero. But isolating hydrogen from other elements is no easy task. Today, the cheapest way to do this is via chemical processes that break up natural gas. This releases a lot of carbon dioxide. Another method is to use electricity to split water molecules in a process called electrolysis. Although there is no carbon byproduct, a lot of electricity is needed. And if this power comes from burning coal or gas, it negates the zero emissions goals of using hydrogen to begin with. Hydrogen produced in this way, powered by fossil fuels, is called gray hydrogen. If carbon capture and storage is used together with fossil fuels, then it becomes blue hydrogen. If nuclear power is used, it's called pink. And finally, green hydrogen is when it's produced via electrolysis and powered from renewable sources. This method is considered emissions-free. It's predicted that by the early 2030s, H2 made from renewables will be cheaper than that made from fossil fuels. But that hinges on the cost of electrolysis declining, which will be achieved through larger projects and an expansion of manufacturing. To be clear, vast amounts of H2 are already used today. Global production in 2018 totaled 117 million metric tons. This hydrogen is mostly used for its chemical properties, not as a source of energy, and very little of it is clean. Some sectors like steel could start using hydrogen for these chemical properties, replacing coal. Industries like cement and glass may also use hydrogen as a source of heat. Another advantage is its energy storage potential. It can be stored over long periods of time and used when more power needs to be added to the grid. It also could hold an advantage over batteries in heavy transport and shipping. The promise of hydrogen for energy has been around since at least 1874, when Jules Verne wrote about it in his book, The Mysterious Island. But the future of hydrogen will depend on policy. Countries with net zero targets, carbon pricing, and hydrogen strategies with investment mechanisms are likely to see the highest H2 demand.
That was Bloomberg's Christine Lee Edwards explaining what hydrogen means for the energy transition. But how are businesses approaching the sector? Well, one of Australia's richest men is making a big play into hydrogen. Andrew Forrest, better known as Twiggy, made his fortune from iron ore, being the chairman, former CEO, and major shareholder in Fortescue Metals, one of the world's biggest miners. But after having made over $10 billion in profit from the metal in the last fiscal year, Twiggy wants to transform Fortescue into a clean energy company. He's been scouring the planet in search of investment opportunities in hydrogen and renewables. The firm plans to allocate up to 10% of its annual profits for green energy investments and is exploring projects across the globe, from Indonesia to Argentina. Francine Lacqua caught up with Twiggy Forrest.
There's only one type of clean hydrogen, all the rest is dirty.
Yeah.
That is green. If you just say green hydrogen is clean, the rest is dirty, then you've actually nailed it. And, you know, anyone else who produces any other rubbish, any other argument, just look them in the eye and say, why is global warming accelerating if anything you're saying is true? And then you'll know, actually, it's greenwashing.
Yeah, but there's a lot of greenwashing because I keep on being told it's a transition. We can't just, make the transition at a click of a finger. So what are we doing wrong? What can we do better?
I don't remember the personal computer having to transition the typewriter. I really don't remember that. I don't remember the smartphone having to transition the pocket calculator and the old landline. You know, its transition line is complete rubbish. The lie got put to it 2 days ago when JCB, a really loved British company, every right for the country to be part of JCB, and Fortescue, holding a bit of a similar reputation, fantastic track record, everyone's done super well from Fortescue, huge balance sheet, super strong. When those two companies got together and agreed a $7 to $9 billion US agreement per annum, right, then that's a real wake-up call to say, hang on, green hydrogen is obviously commercial now. You know, every other form of fossil fuel hydrogen, you know, it can compete with it on price, it can probably lose on price, but what we know, it is cooking the planet. And only green hydrogen, zero methane, zero carbon in the supply chain. Don't worry about the molecules in the supply chain.
But at the moment, we're not even phasing out coal, if you look at the G20 communique. So we have a long way to go to talk about only using green hydrogen.
Yeah, so look, I have a call, which I'd like to make now, that the world should not fund any more coal-fired power stations, coal mining projects, ever. We should wind them down as quickly as possible because they are cooking the planet just like grey and blue hydrogen is cooking the planet.
Yeah.
You know, hydrogen, which is not made from renewable electricity, is releasing 10 to 16 times more carbon, let alone the methane, which is worse, than it is hydrogen. So we've just got to stop doing things which are self-harming under the guise of greenwashing.
So why are leaders so slow? Even if you look at the appetite for ESG investments, they're growing exponentially, so are emissions. So where are we allocating capital?
Okay, so take the recent G20. There's probably a reason why there wasn't strong action coming out of the G20 because people were not aware that major transactions between large companies were taking place now on green hydrogen, that actually this pollution-free all the way through the supply chain fuel was now being transacted at multi-billion-dollar scale. If they'd known that, I don't believe any sovereign leader or any energy minister or climate change minister could not take ultra seriously that green hydrogen is now here to stay. It's broken through. History has been made. It will never go back.
Okay, what is the one thing that you would tell leaders today and business leaders? How do we transition faster than what we are now because we're at real risk of missing our targets?
Oh, so that's really simple. You stop funding, you stop subsidizing, you stop using money into fossil fuels. It could be carbon sequestration, it could be fuel rebates, could be anything. Hundreds of billions of dollars getting ashed while we ash the planet on fossil fuel subsidies. Because we haven't had that renewable electricity, we haven't had that green hydrogen, it's kind of been pushed down. It's all sorts of excuses. Oh, it'll never be commercial. It'll never be supplied in the quantities we need it. You know, blah, blah, blah. Now we know, let's take action. It's practical, it's implementable, Let's do it now.
Okay, if we do it now, is there going to be a shock to the energy system? Is there going to be a shock actually to economically? And is it worth, not talking about transition, just going from A to B?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. A to B is the solution. Let fossil fuels do what fossil fuels do. Just burn their coal, burn their oil, burn the gas. At least they're pumping up carbon and methane into the atmosphere, honestly. Well, not that honest because they don't measure methane, which is 90 times worse than carbon. But at least the carbon is being done honestly. Encourage the green hydrogen sector to come in really fast. Okay, it's there. There's renewable power all over the world. We now know how to make electrolyzers much cheaper, like 25% of the original cost. We know how to do that now. We don't have an excuse to get into it.
Does it need to be cheaper than oil and fossil fuel for it to be viable worldwide?
Well, right now it is. Okay, so let's just swallow that bit of financial data. Right now it is cheaper, and it's getting more cheap. It's the only fuel you know of which is declining in value.
You don't have enough of it, right, to power the world?
Yes. That's only because we haven't had policies to support it. If we had policies to support it 5-10 years ago, it would be everywhere. You'd see the global warming budget start to come down. Yeah. Now, we've got 5 or 10 years to make a huge difference. I need policy leaders all over the world to appreciate now, okay, big business is transacting with green hydrogen in multi-billion-dollar agreements. We now know it's here and it's here to stay. Let's spread it everywhere.
Coming up on the program, the hydrogen revolution. We'll speak with the CEO of Italian utility firm Snam about his new book and why he thinks green hydrogen will be competitive in just 5 years. Plus, how are airlines working to become more sustainable? We'll look at how Airbus plans to step up in the climate fight. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lines, and this is Bloomberg Green. What will the world look like in 2050? Will global temperatures have stabilized, electric vehicles be abundant, and solar and wind power homes around the world? According to Marco Alvera, the CEO of Italian energy company Snam, that vision of the future could be a reality. And he says that hydrogen will pave its way. As he tells it in his new book, The Hydrogen Revolution, Alvera's moment of reckoning came in November 2018 when he tasked the Snam Scenarios team with studying how Europe could reduce its CO2 emissions to zero by 2050. Looking through the results of the study, Alvera said he was struck by how much hydrogen was in Europe's energy mix by that year. Beyond the abundance of hydrogen, the SNAM model also predicted that it would be the cheapest form of decarbonized energy for many sectors, and that it could be cheaper than today's prices for oil, coal, and nuclear power. Our Maria Tadeo spoke with Alvera at COP26.
It's happening all very fast. We see the cost of hydrogen coming down a lot. Hydrogen will play a big role in the energy mix. I don't know if it's going to be 15 or 25% of a fully decarbonized energy system, but it's going to be big. Costs are coming down, and people are waking up to the fact that it's the only way to decarbonize certain sectors, so-called hard-to-abate sectors.
And you say it's the only way and the costs are coming down. Where do you see prices moving? Because a lot of the reticence at times has to do with the pricing, that some argue, well, it's still not the cheapest option on the market.
So when I was first working in hydrogen in 2004, it was costing $1,000 per megawatt hour. 2010, $600. Today, $100, and we see it going down to $50 in 5 years' time, and to going down to $25 per megawatt hour in the next 10 years or so, which is a quarter of where it is today. That's really because renewable energy, and we're talking green hydrogen here, renewable energy costs are falling, but the cost of making the electrolyzer, which is the kit that you use to convert solar or wind energy and water into hydrogen, the cost of this kit is falling a lot because it doesn't really exist on an industrial scale. So as we build up capacity, we industrialize it, we standardize it, and we squeeze costs out. That's really the cost trajectory.
And for that, of course, you need demand, however, for governments and also institutions to kind of buy into this idea that it is the future and we want to invest and create infrastructure. What are they telling you? When you speak to governments, when you speak to officials, are they keen on this?
They're very keen. So the Department of Energy shares our view in the States of getting to below $1 a kilo, which is $25 a megawatt hour. The European Union has a hydrogen strategy, which is very clear, and several member states have the same. Chile wants to export a lot of hydrogen. China's big on hydrogen. Australia's very big on hydrogen. Japan is blending already hydrogen. So I would say the world is now really focused on this because it's the only way to store energy for a long period of time economically is to convert it into either a liquid or a gas.
And of course, you talk about the price, but the other big component is the volume. You know, how big can you go? Where do you see that on a time scale?
So wherever it's sunny or windy, you can produce very cheap hydrogen eventually. And so compared to oil and gas, which are concentrated in few parts of the world, it's going to be very democratic from that point of view. So every sunny place, every desert, every ocean wind can be turned into hydrogen that we can put on ships, in pipes, and really start trading it around the world. So it's going to happen a lot faster than a lot of people think.
So, and when you say a lot faster, what is that in time?
As I said, $50, which is essentially oil parity within 5 years. And then, depending on how quickly we ramp it up after that, we could get to $25, which is coal parity before the end of the decade.
And in big scale.
In big scale, because once you get to coal parity, that's the only way we're going to get China and India to stop burning new coal. We have businesses in China and in India, and I see a lot of hydrogen development, a lot of renewable development in both countries. The India announcement was incredibly strong on 2030. Some people were upset about the 2017 net zero deadline, but when it comes to 30, he announced a big commitment to get to 50% renewables.
Were you surprised by it?
I was surprised that they would make it so explicit, and even the net zero is a big thing for them. And so I think it will happen faster than 2070 because of the falling cost of renewable and hydrogen. India's burning 80 gigawatt of oil, of diesel, to keep the lights on. So there's an immediate opportunity there, and we're very interested in working in that country.
And with regards to China, perhaps the fact that we haven't really seen them active, I guess the diplomats are working on this, but we haven't really seen the leadership.
It's going to be technology, it's going to be industry. I think China has committed to a net zero, which is very important. At the G20, China was clearly behind the 1.5 degrees. So I think a lot has been achieved between the G20 and COP, and I think what's really important is to see in the coming years how quick it's in our hands to make part of this happen in 5 years, or it could otherwise happen in 15, 20 years. It's about building the project. The capital is there. We saw how many trillions of dollars are already committed. What's missing is really the projects, and that's where companies like us step in.
Marco Alvera, CEO of SNAM there, speaking with our Maria Tadeo. Let's turn now to the aviation industry. It's a big contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions, and it's under pressure to change that. In October, the International Air Transport Association, a trade body representing airlines, approved a target of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. To achieve that, many airlines in the US and Europe are looking to buy sustainable aviation fuel made from renewable sources like used vegetable oil. Initiatives like these are pushing plane makers to come up with some radical new aircraft that will eventually cater to our growing appetite for travel without hurting the environment. We took a look at how Airbus, the world's #2 aircraft manufacturer, is stepping up to the challenge.
How long until we can fly emission-free? Airbus says it's more confident by the day it can be done by its 2035 target. Airbus's CEO spoke about its ambitions for hydrogen-powered planes at the company's summit in France.
The physics works. Hydrogen technologies are not new. They are used in other sectors. We use them in space on our rockets, and we don't need the laws of physics to change to be able to use hydrogen on our planes. So every day we become more confident, but we think we need to have a plane, we need to have the right fuels, the hydrogen available in the right quantity at the right place at the right time, and we need the regulations to be ready. So we really need the work and the collaboration of many people around the globe to make it happen on time.
But it could be a long wait until green passenger jets go mainstream. Larger aircraft with more than 150 seats are not expected to feature globally until about 2050. That means manufacturers and airlines today are under growing pressure to ramp up short-term innovations to cut their carbon. In the long term, meeting the ambitious plans for so-called green hydrogen means building a giant industry almost from scratch. To make that happen, British airline EasyJet is among those saying governments need to get involved and fast. Aviation's emissions over the last 3 decades leading up to the pandemic grew by about 80% to over 1 gigaton, and that's projected to double by 2050. According to Bloomberg NEF, about half of the airlines with the largest global market share have set net zero targets by that same date, nearly 3 decades away.
Coming up, from blue sky projects to the bottom line. We'll speak with our Bloomberg NEF expert Meredith Annex and dig into their models about how hydrogen fits into the future energy mix. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and this is Bloomberg Green. Now let's bring in Meredith Annex, our Bloomberg NEF hydrogen specialist, to talk more about how hydrogen could change the energy landscape. So Meredith, what place do you think hydrogen is likely to have in the future energy mix globally?
Hydrogen's this incredible solution for us as we look to decarbonize because it's a perfect solution in areas that are hard to electrify. So where we like to think about hydrogen playing a role, it's in things like heavy industry, especially where you need a feedstock as well as energy source. and in things like dispatchable power, long-haul transport, maybe even shipping and aviation.
That sounds great that it can be used for such diverse industries. At the end of the day, though, how much is this going to cost?
Well, that's the amazing thing about hydrogen, because depending on how you make it, it can actually see significant cost declines in the future. So when we're talking about clean hydrogen, we usually mean green hydrogen produced from renewable electricity. And in that case, your hydrogen is almost as cheap as the renewables that are used to make it. So if you're in a place with really good renewable resources, you'll be able to have cheaper hydrogen. But even in places with less good resources, we think that hydrogen can be cheaper than $1 per kilogram, which is the price of unabated hydrogen today, and around $8 per million BTUs for those who prefer to think in energy units. And that can be achieved anywhere in the world by 2050, we believe.
All right, so let's talk about kind of the pros and cons list. I don't know where cost fits into that, but what are the advantages to hydrogen over other renewables, and then what are the drawbacks?
Yeah, main advantage is the fact that hydrogen can serve roles that electrons struggle with. And that's things like seasonal storage, for instance, or just anything where you need storability, where electrons are harder to store, hydrogen is going to be easier. That also leads to a downside, though, because hydrogen is less energy dense than the usual things that we use for storable energy today, like coal or oil or natural gas. So you will need more volume of storage to handle the same amount of energy.
Let's talk about the viability as well and how it may differ in different geographies. What is your view on that?
Yeah. So for green hydrogen, again, from renewable electricity, really places with the best renewable resources, things like Latin America or the Middle East, even Southern Europe, have really, really good potential for producing hydrogen. And then when you're looking at blue hydrogen, which is produced from natural gas or coal with carbon capture and storage, we do see that becoming more expensive than green hydrogen in the future, especially as renewable electricity costs come down. But that can be a viable option in places like the US Gulf Coast or Russia, where you've got good geological storage for the carbon, as well as ample natural gas that's quite cheap.
All right, great breakdown. Thank you so much to our Meredith Annex, our Bloomberg NEF hydrogen specialist. And of course, you can get more from the Bloomberg NEF team on the terminal and online. And they've recently done a podcast called Hydrogen 101 as part of its Switched On series. So from iron ore titans pivoting to cleaner energy to talk of a hydrogen revolution, that's it from this week's edition of Bloomberg Green. We'll be back next week with a deep dive into the state of electric vehicles. And you can keep the conversation going by following us on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter @Climate. I'm Kaylee Lyons from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York, and this is Bloomberg Green.
The great sci-fi art of the mid-20th century teased a vision of the future with one distinct element in common: a life for humans in outer space. Whether vacationing on an exotic new planet or commuting to the moon for business, space travel seemed like it was just around the corner. Yet here we are, a half-century later, and only about 500 human beings have ever left the bounds of Earth's atmosphere. But thanks to a set of ambitious private companies betting on the promise of space tourism, that long-awaited future could be here sooner than we think. For most of the history of spaceflight, governments have been the prime force behind nearly every aspect, from planning to funding to crew selection. But as early as the 1980s, proposals for commercial space tourism began to emerge, along with innovative solutions for getting people there, such as the wild concept of sticking a 74-person passenger cabin in the cargo bay of a NASA space shuttle. Although various non-astronauts have been selected for missions over the years, true space tourism didn't happen until 2001, when an entrepreneur named Dennis Tito coughed up an estimated $20 million to hitch a ride with the Russian Federal Space Agency for a week-long vacation aboard the International Space Station. 20 years later, we're seeing a new contender in this final frontier of tourism: private companies.
It's becoming a private enterprise situation, still very high risk with a high reward, potential reward. But, government is really out of the business of flying people now, and it's really going to be companies like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson that do that heavy lifting. Commercial space tourism is usually about taking the non-astronaut, the private citizen, into an orbital or suborbital flight. So you get a short amount of microgravity experience, and you can float and take some photos. And then you come back. This was something that technology had gotten to a point where the private sector was going to make a business out of this. There are multiple companies that want to get to the place where they fly people into space.
The first of these is Blue Origin, founded in 2000 by Jeff Bezos. Using the autonomous rocket system New Shepard, a tribute to the first American in space, Blue Origin plans to launch up to 6 passengers at a time, offering a rarefied treat of 62-mile-high views and a momentary experience of weightlessness. Booking officially kicked off in May 2021, with the very first seat to be auctioned off for charity. Meanwhile, Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic has also been pursuing a viable form of suborbital tourism, aiming for a launch in 2022 once Sir Richard himself has taken a flight.
I'm hoping to be able to go to space. I'd love to be able to coincide it with the moon landing and go to space. So I've got the whip on the team, and we'll see how we go.
The company claims to have lined up over 600 seat reservations so far, including Justin Bieber and Leonardo DiCaprio. Virgin has projected that the final cost of the ticket will be at least $250,000, or roughly $50,000 for each of the 5 minutes or so of weightlessness that you'll get to experience. Although costly, both companies' offerings aim to make suborbital flight a regular form of adventure travel, eventually driving down costs at scale to expand the customer base beyond the orbit of celebrities and billionaires. The third major contender is Elon Musk's SpaceX, which has set its sights even higher on orbital flights, which are
a whole nother level of complexity and energy and danger. When you go suborbital, if you're just going to go up above the von Karman line, which is 100 kilometers or about 62 miles, you only need to get up to maybe 5,000 miles an hour to get up there, and you go basically straight up and then straight back down. You don't have the reentry heating that you would see coming in from an orbital. So when you go orbital, I don't care if you're a baseball or a battleship, you've got to go 17,500 miles per hour, not just 5,000 miles an hour. The energies involved are much greater. By doing that, SpaceX has gone another level up, and that's what they're doing with the Inspiration 4.
Visit inspiration4.com for your chance to go to space.
Inspiration 4 is the first planned all-civilian mission into orbit, slated to launch in late 2021. The crew will bring their own set of diverse perspectives and backgrounds and experiences to test how a group of different people, namely people who aren't professional astronauts, could fare in space.
Until now, astronauts have had to be physically perfect, and this mission is changing that. And so I feel incredibly honored to be representing those who aren't physically perfect. At age 10, I was diagnosed with bone cancer, and I was treated at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And I spent a year there undergoing intense chemo and also surgery that ultimately saved my leg. I now work at St. Jude as a PA, a physician assistant, and I work with leukemia and lymphoma patients. The kids we work with are so brave, and they are very excited to watch me go to space because this is showing them that, you know, they're capable of doing this as well.
Haley, along with 3 other crew members, will spend 3 days in space, orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes before landing back off the coast of Florida.
Well, when you think about access, the first astronauts for the United States came from the test pilot side. And so women weren't allowed to be a part of that. We have somebody in their 20s, somebody in their 30s, somebody in their 40s, and somebody in their 50s. And so there can be access in all kinds of ways, whether you're talking about age, whether you're talking about gender, whether you're talking about race and ethnicity, and all of those things.
The first time, you know, people are going up into space and not sent there by a superpower like the United States or Russia or China, well, that's like really significant. And, you know, you've got to, you know, be very thoughtful about it. The whole game plan right now is to make space like really affordable and, you know, accessible for everybody so that you can have fishing buddies going to space someday. But the first is special. And so with that, we wanted to have, you know, a crew selection process that could make space available to everyday people.
Getting to space is only the first step for space tourism. The next challenge is what to do and where to stay when you get there. Axiom Space is planning to launch the first segment of a new commercial space station in 2024. Their $2 billion project, called Ax Station, will become the first free-flying private international space station. Or, to use a more consumer-friendly term, a space hotel. Axiom isn't the only company out to make your space stay a little more comfortable. Bigelow Aerospace has been building what they call expandable habitat technology, like their B330, an inflatable pod module that expands once in orbit.
There's even one attached to the International Space Station right now they've been testing. And you take it up and it's rather small, and then you inflate it, and it seems to be working very, very well. This is likely to be the first kind of tourist hotel that you're going to see up in space. First of all, it's easier to carry instead of this giant tin can with all of that. The inflatables are lighter. You can just blow them up, and they get a nice big size for about, you know, less than half the weight probably.
But even as space missions become accessible to civilians,
the risks of going into space are incredibly high. And you could die 1,000 ways that we can think of and 1,000 other ways that we can't think of.
This is Michelle Hanlon. She's a space lawyer at the Mississippi School of Law, focused on protecting humans in outer space.
Now, I'm not an attorney for any of the space tourists, so I haven't been privy to their private contracts. But I can tell you that the FAA requires certain waivers to be in those contracts. So, for example, the FAA says, well, we're not going to make you make your spacecraft to a certain safety level. We are going to make you, spacecraft operator, make sure that you inform your space tourists of all of the hazards that you know of. I imagine a very long waiver, all the ways you can die in space. And you have to understand that there's health risks, and you have to indemnify the U.S. government if you are launching from the United States. So those are things that we know a space tourist has to sign and has to waive. So now let's go back and think about our space flight participants. The FAA calls space tourists space flight participants. They don't call them astronauts. Why is that important? If you're not an astronaut, there's no obligation to rescue you if something goes wrong. It's a lot of money to set up a rescue launch. If it can even be done, it's something really important to think about, and that difference as we cross this threshold from having astronauts in space to having real people like me in space.
And when we are able to make it to space reliably enough, there's still a host of other legal and ethical issues to consider before space tourism can truly take off.
There are so many gaps in space law that we are going to have to put in a lot of sort of basement ideas. And so, for example, the Outer Space Treaty is a treaty that offers principles and guidelines for state activities, for the activities of national governments. It doesn't talk about private entities. It doesn't talk about humans in space. So now if something goes wrong, so let's think about all the times hotels on Earth are sued, right? So slip and falls. You step on something in the bathroom, you sue the hotel, and it becomes a private lawsuit. because of the vagaries of international law, if something happens in space, well, boy, you can sue the state that launched your spacecraft, you can sue the company that brought you there, you can sue the hotel, you can sue the individual, you can sue every government related to that, because the way the Outer Space Treaty and the Outer Space Regime have set this up is that anything that happens in space first has to go through a diplomatic channel before you think about suing in a court of law. And so every single slip and fall in a space hotel is a diplomatic nightmare. And so we really need to figure that out before we start sending a lot of people there. You think about human rights in space. Here, we don't think about a human right to oxygen because it's kind of all around us and free. It's not in a space hotel. So what happens if something happens and the oxygen depletes? Who gets the oxygen first? And then, of course, let's not even think about the labor. How do you treat your labor in a space hotel where that person may be there for 2 or 3 years without coming back to Earth? So a lot of things to think about.
Space habitats are more likely in the near future to focus on research missions and be a home for experiments that can't happen as easily back on Earth.
Space hotels, I think they garner a lot of headlines and a lot of news, but at the same time, that's not the first thing that you're going to see happen. They don't offer the compelling business case, I think, that you'll see from a place that wants to manufacture pharmaceuticals or a new type of crystal or some type of filament or fiber optic cables and other things that you can do in microgravity. The things that are actually, a high value finished good, when you get that back to Earth and you sell it for a very, very huge profit margin, that's what's likely to happen in space, as opposed to having a real estate platform that you sell to a tourist. A space hotel is really interesting, and it will probably happen, but it's not likely to be at the forefront of space commerce.
Even if space hotels are right around the corner, don't get too excited about booking a trip in one.
It's not a cheap ticket to ride to space, and it's going to be, millionaires and billionaires and that sort. But at the same time, the point was made that in the early days of airline trips, that was also a completely unaffordable ticket for most people. Those people who flew were people of means, and over time it becomes affordable to the masses. And I think that's the goal for all the entrepreneurs in space as well, to get those costs down to a point where it's not $10 million or $5 million or $300,000 ride into suborbital space. When it becomes more like buying a first-class ticket to go to Europe from the United States. So that's the goal, and the question is, can we get to that point?
Given the immense operating costs of getting to space, it may be years, if ever, until space tourism becomes a profitable venture for any of these companies. Virgin Galactic, the only publicly traded company of the three, has had a particularly rocky year, initially riding on the momentum of a SPAC deal, but more recently beset by launch delays and major funders, including Branson himself, selling large quantities of their stock in the company.
Space is really, really, really hard, and it's an absolute cliche, but it's one that happens to be very true. It's just really hard to do. That's also the reason that you've seen the delays that, Virgin had talked about flying years and years ago. And it became such a crazy point that Richard Branson actually stopped talking about it when he was asked, because it was never going to be when he predicted. But it's not insurmountable. And, investors have stepped up because this is something that is doable.
Despite the astronomical dangers and costs of getting to space, it may ultimately follow the course of other once fanciful modes of travel.
Wright brothers having, what was by modern standards a very unimpressive first flight, at Kitty Hawk. I mean, you had less than 20 years later, you had your first airborne ambulances being used to save lives. Fundamentally, the world is a more interesting place when people can go and dance among the stars and such.
The lure of space is innate. It's in our DNA. It's that exploration bug. We are an exploratory species, and we want to go out there and see what's out there.
That vision that I had in 1969 of seeing normal human beings travel into space, it's finally beginning to happen. When you get a bunch of people up there and they can all see it for themselves, that'll create even yet another revolution in how we treat our planet and the way we think about it.
So while 2001 came and went without quite looking like Stanley Kubrick's ultimate space fantasy, 2021 might finally be the year we're catching up.
If you visit California, you might be inclined to go to Disneyland, or jump in your convertible and take Highway 1 up the coast, or maybe make a pilgrimage to Yosemite. All very fine choices. But if you're the kind of person who revels in our planet's extremes, then it's Route 395 that you're after. This one glorious road will carry you from Death Valley's desert floor to sky-high views of Mount Whitney. You can see the 5,000-year-old bristlecone pines, the oldest living organism, where all the businesses are shut down. To do 395 upright, it helps to have a guide, and mine is a man named Jan, and his crew, Aaron,
Let's tidy up first.
and Lemmy, the hardest partying dog of all time. Jan agreed to show me some of what 395 has to offer, but only if we agreed not to disclose any locations.
My name is Jan Swirstra. I'm an industrial designer out of LA, and I spend a lot of time camping and a lot of time in the Eastern Sierra. It's a place I love, and sometimes I'm known as 395 North because my Instagram account, and I don't like to be known as that, but I'm trying to use it to set a good example and do more with it than just social media.
Where did we end up camping? We got here late last night. I wasn't even sure where we are.
This is BLM land, right on the outskirts of National Forest, and it's one of my favorite places in the world. Basically, everything outdoors wrapped into one.
Yeah. Good thing about California, man.
Oh, man. We have so much national forest and public land that you can literally just cruise out and find a place to camp. It's ours.
What I wish was mine is Jan's sweet truck.
It's a 2019 Ford Ranger. Has about 200 watts of solar in it and a fridge, and has everything that an RV has except for a toilet, but just on a smaller, simple scale.
And you drive us around day to day in LA.
Yep.
And then just roll out when you want.
It's my daily driver. Handles great. And then when I'm done with work, I can just bail and go camping. So the camper basically has only what I need. Think of it as backpacking with a car.
Yeah.
The fridge has a couple compartments. This is just a kitchen box, stove, utensils, and a bunch of stuff. This one has just dry food. Then when you get inside, there's a bed. The bed flips up, so you've got tons of room in here. This awning is phenomenal. If you want to pull that over.
That is cool.
Let me just pop that up.
Sorted.
So, home on wheels.
Yeah.
This is my vacation house.
Dude, it's so nice, man. Even with his nomad lifestyle, Jan faces the same big question as the rest of us. Do the internet and smartphones have to ruin everything?
When you find the super special, beautiful spots, is that you busting out a map and like looking where it might be cool to go, or is it word of mouth and just getting to know people, the locals? And
if I see a dirt road, I just want to go down it. So a lot of it's just aimless rambling. It's a desire to just see something. Check that out. For some reason, it's more fulfilling than getting a recommendation from somebody. Or there's tons of apps and websites now, road trip apps, camping apps. They've proliferated. The knowledge is accessible on the internet, right? I used to fight the geotags, and I would get really pissed off. Like, why are you posting this place? It's gonna blow up, it's gonna get trashed. Now I've realized that you can't fight it. The internet has just shrunk the world. So we're not gonna stop it. We're not gonna stop people from going there. So I'm a lot more focused in conversation now with trying to set a good example. When you go, pick up your trash. When you're pooping out in the wilderness, don't leave your toilet paper on the top. You know, make sure you follow, good steps for leaving no trace.
As a thank you for this quick guide to pooping etiquette, we made Jan, Heron, and Lemmy some tacos. And we all took in the night sky and knocked back a couple of drinks. Take that, Apocalypse. The thing about good times and serenity in 2020 is that they're fleeting at best. After we split up from Jan and continued on our way, smoke started to envelop us. The plus side was that our RV no longer smelled like feet. The downside was breathing. My man David here suggested that we try and outflank the smoke by cutting through Yosemite. Without a reservation, we had to talk our way in.
Yes, no stopping, no getting out, and yeah, don't go in the valley. Yeah, no problem. We just wanted to get through.
It was a beautiful choice.
Glad we got out of the smoke. Whoa, okay.
But not quite as effective as we had hoped. Fast forward 4 hours or so, and we had managed to trade the smoky majesty of Yosemite for the smoky,
look at it,
strip malls of the Central Valley.
We have made it sort of out of the smoke all the way across Yosemite National Park and here to the gorgeous Central Valley of California. We're off to see a kind of surprising tech startup that is making some pretty strange machines to serve all the growers out in this region. So we're here in this near Fresno. This is California farm country, right?
We're just south of Fresno, a town called Kingsburg. So we're right in the Central Valley of California. Very, very large farming valley here. It's kind of considered the breadbasket of the world.
The Central Valley stretches out over about 20,000 square miles, and the farmers here produce about 1/4 of the food that Americans eat, including a whole lot of fruits and nuts.
Tell me a little bit of the background of Gus. I know some of this is like a family business. The roots of this go back a ways. Tell me kind of like how we got to what's essentially like a startup, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So the founder of our company is Dave Crinklaw, and he started the business back in 1982. He started with is basically with his dad was commercial spraying of trees and vineyards. Got to the point where our biggest challenge was labor, just the shortage of it, really. He was forced into innovating, and he had this idea for quite some time about doing a driverless sprayer, and it finally got to the point where he said, you know what, I either got to get out of this business or I'm going to innovate.
Organic or not, crops need to be sprayed, and this process has to take place a few times a year. This means hiring a lot of people to work long hours under serious pressure. And so, just like the tech bros to the north, Gus decided to solve all of its problems with robots.
On this like labor point, you guys have set this up where you can have somebody in a truck and that one person can monitor, I think like 8 of these.
In order to operate Gus, you have one guy or girl that sits in a pickup and they monitor from a laptop computer. So that person is basically just watching all the vehicles on the screen. They can monitor up to 8 of them at a time while they're out there spraying in the orchard. And so that user interface really provides them with all the information they need to make sure that the machines are safe and that they're doing the correct job. So it tells them what speed they're driving, the engine RPM, the amount of gallonage per acre that they're applying at any given time. So if any one of the machines has an issue, it's going to send an alert to that laptop.
Much like a self-driving car, these beasts use GPS, LiDAR, and cameras to see and navigate the world around them. They also rely on pre-built maps of the orchards for extra guidance. Gus builds the machines right here, and then takes them out for robot training on this orchard next door. It's here that the company learns if the machines will behave and do as their software and human masters command.
So this is kind of like this is a test orchard where you guys put it through the paces and work on the technology?
Yeah, so this is our here. It's right by our building, as you can see in the background. So every new machine, as it comes off the assembly line, it's put through a commissioning test right here. We test all the sensors on the machine, autonomous computer, all the safety systems, make sure it's doing what it's doing prior to when it's delivered to a customer.
So what's it doing now?
So right now he's doing a test spray. So he's just turning the water on to make sure that the system comes up to pressure, spraying water out of the nozzles just to make sure it's all functioning properly.
Okay. It's got like a crazy turbine at the back, or?
Yeah, so it's basically just a big fan.
Okay.
And that fan's driven off of the Cummins diesel motor, and it just basically creates a big airflow.
Gus is already selling these vehicles to brave modern farmers. And people the world over have taken notice of its machines.
And have you just sold them in the Central Valley or like throughout the U.S. or even overseas, or where are they going?
Yeah, so right now the majority of our machines are here in California in the Central Valley. However, we do have machines and customers in Florida, in the citrus industry over there, as well as Australia.
And I think you started selling them in like December of 2019?
Yeah,
right?
So we started taking orders early last year for the sprayers, and the first deliveries we made were in December of 2019.
Okay, so. And how much do they cost each?
So our retail price on these machines is $285,000.
So it's not a small investment, but I'm sure the regular sprayers aren't cheap.
Yeah,
either.
I mean, we're honestly not too far away from conventional equipment on our price, and the main thing is that the return on investment is very, very quick due to all the labor savings and the increased efficiency. I mean, these machines, they just drive. But basically what we're doing, besides this machine, this is our first machine. We call it Orchard Gus, mainly designed for your nut trees, as well as citrus and fruit. In the future, we're working on a few other projects. We're going to do more machines. One of them is actually a vineyard sprayer. So vineyards are much tighter spacing, so the machine has to be physically smaller. And then we've got our eyes on doing a lot of other innovating.
That right there, friends, is a Central Valley farmer putting his whole fruit basket on the table. Gary's TED Talk can't be far off. And with that, it was time to get back in the RV and to confront what happens when three men are bested by their own failings and the forces of entropy. Next on Hello World, we cruise into the Mojave Desert in search of a lunar lander.
We have instruments that we are going to deliver to the South Pole of the Moon in December of 2022. Instruments that are trying to scan the surface of the moon.
And hang with a test pilot who walked away from this.
Meet Betty. She lives by herself, but for the last few months, she hasn't been alone.
LQ, tell me a joke.
Did you hear about the claustrophobic astronaut?
No.
Apparently, he just needed a little space.
Most technology isn't made for 93-year-olds. But this woman is making sure that this particular robot is.
I like you. Who are you?
She's researching the way we interact with machines. And if she has her way, robots will soon be a trusty companion for all of us.
My name is LQ. How can I help you?
As technology replaces old jobs, it's also creating new ones. I'm Aki Ito, and I'm here to show you the jobs of the future.
My name is Danielle Ishak, and I am a human-robot interaction researcher. It's really hard to intuitively design a robot meant for a consumer audience. You have to make sure that it's a robot that people want, people know how to use, and people value.
Danielle works for an Israeli startup called Intuition Robotics. Its U.S. office is here in downtown San Francisco.
Hello?
Hey Danielle, it's Aki.
Come on in.
The company is funded by a couple big names like Samsung and Toyota. Full disclosure, Bloomberg's venture capital arm is an investor too.
This is Ellie Q.
Can I take her out for a spin?
Please.
Ellie Q, tell me what you can do.
I am a proactive social robot designed for older adults. I can connect you to your family and friends, and even play music.
These features might remind you of the Amazon Echo, but you'd be missing the point if you compared her to a smart speaker. She's not meant to just be useful. She's meant to be a companion.
Why don't you take a break and have a drink?
And that's why she has a head that can nod and make other subtle gestures you might expect from a pet.
Through our research with older adults, we're finding that almost on a daily basis, we see that somebody tells her that they love her.
Really?
Or that they like her. Or that they miss
Literally,
her.
I love you?
Mm-hmm. They'll also tell her, I'm depressed, or I'm lonely. They'll open up to her in a way that they might not necessarily open up to a human because they don't feel like they'll be judged.
Ellie Q isn't on sale yet. But a prototype is already in the homes of about a dozen early testers who live in the Bay Area.
Ellie Q, tell me what the weather is today.
Danielle's job is to figure out what's working and what's not.
Sorry, please rephrase your request.
And she does that by visiting each of her testers twice a month.
How important are these visits to your job?
They're critical. We're building a product for people who we are not. I'm not a senior, and how could you know how to design for somebody if you don't do research? Because otherwise, you would just be designing in the dark.
Jobs like Danielle's are just starting to emerge. Until recently, robots were mostly in factories, separated from humans. But now, they're finally getting cheap enough, small enough, and smart enough to be in our homes. This has created a whole new challenge of designing robots that people will actually want to interact with. And that's where Danielle comes in. Her research has helped shape every little facet of Ellie Q, from the way Ellie Q moves to the way she talks.
It's a very special job, and it can be really hard, and it can be really frustrating, but at the end of the day, it's incredibly rewarding. And I think the most rewarding part about it is when I see the joy on the users' faces, like that they saw their feedback turned into something real.
Today, we've driven east of San Francisco to go see one of Danielle's research participants.
Ellie Q, tell me something interesting.
Did you know that Ronald Reagan was a lifeguard in high school and saved 77 people's lives?
Now, see, this is where a conversation is. She should open up and I should say, no, I did not know that. I expect her to be able to continue a conversation for at least a couple of comments.
Yeah. And why is that?
Why?
Yeah.
Because that's companionship.
When Betty was around Danielle's age, she was working with some of history's very first computers.
When I was finishing up my master's degree, I was working at Harvard in the computer lab when they were building Mark IV. A large room-sized computer. But now, this artificial intelligence stuff is amazing. Ellie Q?
Yes?
Schedule a doctor's appointment.
No problem. I'm working on it.
When Danielle brought along the idea of working with robotics for the elderly, I said, are you kidding me? Will older people connect to a robot? And she said, I don't know, let's research and find out.
Danielle grew up here in this suburb of Atlanta. Her parents spent much of their childhoods in Israel and met in the US.
We as immigrants, we understood that we might need to work a little harder. In fact, I feel that rather than taken away from Danielle, it gave her so much more because she understood the fact that you need to run after your dreams and work really hard no matter what the challenges are.
School didn't come easily for Danielle.
I have dyslexia, and that very much affected my self-esteem academically.
The principal of the school did not recommend her to take advanced classes. She fought for it, and she got into it, and she did very well with them, too.
Danielle's first job out of grad school was at X, the secretive research facility founded by Google. It's known for dreaming up all kinds of wacky, far-flung ideas.
Can you tell us about the moonshots you worked on?
No, I can't tell you too much about the projects that I worked on. I can say that I was working on robotics.
She loved the job, but wanted to work on something that would reach real consumers sooner. So she left X after a year and joined Intuition Robotics. She's been working in the field for 4 years now, and it took her a while to find her footing in a male-dominated industry.
I've gone to different meetups where there'll be like a circle of men with their like zip-up jacket with their like company logo on it and a beer in their hand. And I'll come in with lipstick and nobody wants to talk to me. This is my closet.
So at first she did her best to fit in, wearing a pair of glasses she didn't need and toning down her style.
So what's the kind of thing you used to wear to a conference?
Stuff like this, blousey things that make you look like you're 40.
But that got old after a while.
And what's the kind of thing you wear now?
Now it's like I just enjoy being kind of expressive and playful in what I wear.
Before we wrap up for the day, Danielle has one more LEQ tester to visit. Joseph is 97. And he's had the robot in his home for 8 months.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. How has Miss LEQ been?
She always tells me to take a drink of water at least 4 times a day.
So we added a whole bunch of new facts to LEQ.
Did you know that a cup of chopped red bell pepper contains more vitamin C than an orange?
Okay. What did you think of that?
Certainly the print was, I could see that quite clearly.
What about this?
Well, I can see that. LEQ, play music.
No problem. It will begin shortly.
By 2050, almost 500 million people are going to be 80 or older. And if current trends continue, more and more are going to be like Joseph and Betty, living alone.
LEQ, stop.
Today, both of them are doing okay. But some of Danielle's other participants have been struggling.
Is it kind of hard to leave them at the end of the day?
It is. Some of our testers are pretty advanced in the stages of depression through loneliness and isolation. And at times, I know that LEQ is cheering them up in their day, but I know that it's only part of the way. No source of artificial intelligence robots will ever be able to replace humans and human companionship or human care.
The key to Danielle's work is to embrace that very limitation of machines.
Robots should help humans do what they love, help humans interact with more humans, help humans in general not pull humans away from humans, not take humans' jobs and leave humans without purpose.
Whether it's in our workplaces or in our homes, robots are soon going to be everywhere. And it's up to Danielle to make sure this robot-filled future leaves us just a little better off.
So don't be afraid. And if you are afraid, come and join us, because I promise it's a friendly place.
Times are tough. Jobs are scarce. It's risky to be outside and around others. Seems like there's very few ways to make extra money during a pandemic. So I guess I'll just hunker down and binge social media until this all blows over. Wait, don't these people make money? How do these people make money? Streamers, YouTubers, Twitch stars. How do they make money? Is it a lot? Is it a lot of work? I know, I gotta ask somebody in the biz, and I got just the guy. Austin John Plays.
This is your full-time job now, right?
As of November of last year, yes. This was always just kind of like a side thing. Like, any money that I made from doing my videos and whatever else, I never touched that because I didn't really think of that as being like real money. And then it started coming in more and more. And then it was like I hit my first day that I broke $1,000 and I was like, this is actually going to be money.
How did the YouTube channel come to be?
When the game Pokemon Sun and Moon came out for the 3DS, there was like things that I learned about the game, and then I wanted to just share that information with people. And at the time, I didn't have any way to capture a screen or anything, so I found like generic footage and I kind of put it all together with so much editing. And that video got 6 views. And then 2 days later, I made another one, and that one got 12 views. And then I just started pumping out more and more content, and people were like, this guy knows what he's talking about. It really just started building on top of itself, and then it was like, my channel really focuses on tips and tricks. So I play a straight 18 hours, and I'll finish the game or get to about the 40-hour mark, and then I'll make my first video. While I'm going through, I have a giant notepad and just scribbles everywhere, and I make these notes of like the things that stumped me, so I know the things that may stump other people.
What do you need to think about if you're building your YouTube channel?
1, you need to do something that you're passionate about. Not that you like, not that you think you're gonna make money on, something you're passionate about. The other thing is something that other people are passionate about. It holds a special place to them. And third is, it needs to be something that people are gonna seek out information on. In order to enter into the marketplace, you either need to be better than everyone else, you either need to be faster than everyone else, or you need to be more accessible than everyone else. And you can't be more accessible because it's already on the platform. Granted, if you understand how the algorithm works, which is very similar to Google Analytics, then yeah, you can have a little bit of a head start. But if you're not doing it faster, and if you're not doing it better than everyone else, then why should anyone watch your channel? So my income as a YouTuber kind of breaks down to 3 different ways. 1, which is the bulk of it, which is ad revenue. Whenever you go and you watch a video and then there's an ad and then you wait 5 seconds and you hit the bottom right corner and then you go on to the next video, or a non-skippable ad, or the video starts immediately, you get the little banner ad at the bottom, or if you scroll down from the video, the first thing that shows there is an ad. Those are the 4 different types of ads that can appear on every single YouTube video. And all of them pay a certain amount. It varies on lots of things, like the country of the person who posts it, the country of the person who watches it, the time of year, where you are in the quarter, if there's anything going on with a reduction in ad revenue. Like, great example, COVID-19, companies weren't spending as much on advertising. So because of that, CPM went down. CPM stands for click per thousand. am using the Roman numeral for 1,000. And that means that for every 1,000 views, you get a certain amount of money. Now, on low ads, when I first started off, my CPM was 30 cents. So every 1,000 views, I made 30 cents. But then once I signed with an MCN and I started making more quality content and more engaging content, some of my better videos and certain times of the year, I can see CPMs as high as $12 to $14. And there's a big fluctuation between, you know, if I post a video when there's no ads being spent like January and February, that's a reason a lot of your favorite YouTubers and also TV shows don't post new videos in that time of year because ad rates are down. Why are they going to make content then? Instead, you're recording and you're bulking up for when ad revenue is higher. The second way that a YouTuber makes income is support, crowdfunding, things like that. When I first started off, Patreon was really the only option, but then they started rolling out supporters and members for YouTube channels. So whenever I have a live stream, you can click a button and then you can become a member, and then you get special icons next to your name. I believe they're called badges, or on any video, you can hit the join button and that helps support the channel. And then the third aspect of that would be merch. And for me, my merch has been somewhat basic. In fact, I'm wearing one of my t-shirts from last year right now. You have to endure the times that your first video gets 6 views, that you posted on Reddit and they say, shut up, and then an auto mod bans you. You have to go through that, because until you go through that and you discover why you're doing it, you're not doing it for other people, you're doing it for yourself. If you're not loving what you do, then it's not worth it.
Huh. So make a channel about something that I'm passionate about. Oh, sweet. I guess I can make the channel about that. Now, how do I grow an audience? How do I get popular?
It's all about diversification, right? You have to have a massive Twitter following. You have to have a massive Instagram following. You have to have a massive YouTube following. Of course, you have to be on Twitch, which is the key platform. But basically, any way you can get in front of your audience, you can engage with your audience, is going to drive those clicks, which ultimately drives the advertiser revenue that you get back from all of these platforms.
It's me and Dan playing video games and talking in a funny manner over them.
They're not just people who are good at games, they're actually people who are good at online engagement, online entertainment, first and foremost.
You have the right to remain stylish. Anything you wear can and will be used against you in the court of fashion.
The streamer is either very, very talented at the game. The best player in the game is generally going to draw a crowd because people like watching people who are very good. On the other hand, they're either very, very good or funny, charismatic, whatever it is on that side.
Oh, no.
You know, it becomes more of a show where they talk about other things outside of the gaming world, and gaming becomes really just a backdrop and an excuse to engage with that audience.
There were those weird, like, Ronald McDonald, like, straight to VHS movies. You remember those?
I'm personable, I'm chatty. I would kind of, you know, when boring things were happening in the game, I would ramble on about, you know, movies I'd watched or books I'd read and, you know, or conversations I'd had and stuff like that. And so I think being personable was a big part of that.
It's not just getting on and playing games. It's getting on and being an entertainer. You are putting on a show.
All right, now let me go ahead and grab the samurai sword that every gym has. Okay, he's dead.
To have a larger audience and to, you know, you have to find your niche. You have to find what works and what connects with the audience and what makes them laugh and what makes them keep coming back.
You gotta make it a little more exciting, all right? Throw in a hanging bishop. Have everybody in suspense for a moment.
I think the real most important thing is to just get used to being on camera. Like in any sort of performance thing, is get used to talking on camera. You know, my first few videos were terrible, but because I sat down and did it for 6 to 8 hours a day, I just got used to talking and I got over that uncomfortable hump.
if you go into Twitch purely with the expectation that you're going to make money, make a job out of it, have all this growth, and it's going to be great, you're probably going to burn out prior to getting to that point, because there's very little payoff for a long time, right? Like multiple years generally before you really start to see a payoff. And so, you know, those first few times you're streaming, nobody is there. One person shows up every 30 minutes, says hi maybe, and leaves, right? Like, it's very discouraging, I think, for a lot of people. And so you have to be there just loving it. You have to love talking to yourself when nobody is around. You have to love just the game that you're playing, all of that stuff, because it takes a while. And I think a majority of people burn out prior to getting to the like profitable point of it.
And there you have it. My very own YouTube, Twitch, Discord, and streaming channels all ready to go live. It's a veritable social media ecosystem just on the verge of thriving. So, don't forget to smash like and subscribe, and visit my Patreon for perks. Also, go to my merch page. And one last thing, stay cool, my friends.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
Matt Miller here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio with my old partner in crime, Paul Sweeney. I am filling in as my summer job for Tim Stenevec. And you're filling in for Carol just today?
Yeah, just today.
Just today.
Back to normal.
We're back together again, buddy.
I know. Good stuff.
We got a lot to talk about today. There's a heck of a lot going on. We're expecting Hakeem Jeffries to come out around 4 o'clock. Let's say in the 4 o'clock hour to tell us from the Democrats' side of the table how the debt ceiling negotiations are going.
Yeah, I mean, you feel like, let's just say June 1st is kind of the date. That feels kind of like a next date. But there feels like there's a day before that seems important. Like, isn't there a day where you can't just push a button and all the money continues to flow? Like, does Janet Yellen really need by May 28th or so? Like, I don't know what that day is. Or are we really just sitting there and waiting for June 1st?
Well, and then you got a lot of people like the Republican senator that was just talking with Kayleigh and Joe about the idea that maybe Janet Yellen was a little bit early with her ex date, or maybe that's a little bit of a fuzzy date, right?
You know, yes, or it could be just saying, "Hey guys, this is my line in the sand." But you know, Ira Jersey from Bloomberg Intelligence, he actually has a model on his computer that tracks all the cash out and the cash in for the U.S. government, and he's kind of like June 6th, June 7th is kind of when his little model says the U.S. runs out of money. So
I mean, I assume that Yellen has a model too, right?
She's not relying on Irish.
She's got access to the data.
She's got a computer.
But of course, she is a political player in this. It's not like she's completely unbiased. That's very clear, I think, from what we've heard from her. Also, Tina Turner dies.
I just saw that. Ran across 83 years old. That was a heck of a run there.
It was an amazing run. She was an icon for sure, and at the ripe old age of 83, she's left us. So we'll probably hear some Tina Turner music throughout the show. Right now, let's get over to our colleagues in TV for the
countdown to the close. Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage ahead of the U.S. market close starts right now.
This is the countdown to the close. About 60 minutes left to go here in the trading session. Romain Bostic, Kriti Gupta, joined right now by our colleagues Matt Miller and Paul Sweeney. Welcome to our audiences across Bloomberg Television, Radio Originals, and those folks streaming on YouTube. Matt Miller, another down day here across U.S. markets. Right, not far off session lows. Still some concerns here about what's going on in Washington.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the main focal point, right? It has been for days, for weeks now, but especially today when we see the very front end of the curve shooting up. Those yields on U.S. debt due in June, over 7% right now. Here's an amazing chart that I got from Abigail Doolittle. Don't know where she got it, but unbelievable spikes in these yields, right? That's what you would expect since that debt is maturing right around the X date, June 6th and June 1st, whenever that X date may be. But certainly the market is paying some attention to this.
Yeah, and you compare that to the equity markets, and you just think about the year-to-date performance across the equity markets. They don't seem too concerned about this debt ceiling. We have the the S&P up about 8-9% year-to-date, NASDAQ up 20%, the NASDAQ 100 up about 25%. So unlike the T-bill market, the equity market's just kind of chugging along here.
It was interesting, though. You talk about the big gains that we saw, particularly in the Russell 2000 on Monday. That's already been erased over the last couple of days here as the blame game in Washington continues here. The S&P 500 setting up for it's going to be a two-day, 2% slide. And take a look there at the NASDAQ, which, of course, had been one of the outperformers, particularly the NASDAQ 100. You're looking at the NASDAQ composite right now down 0.9%.
Yeah, and if you break that down on a sector basis, look, it's a pretty broad sell-off, which is ironic because we're talking about this kind of defensive bid in the equity market, largely in kind of the AI-focused names in the last couple of months here, but broad gains was not a part of it. A broad sell-off certainly is. I feel like the panic is now finally taking place in the equity market that, Paul, to your point, has kind of been on the sidelines for some time. At the bottom of the pack, the real estate index really taking it on the chin, down about 2.2%, barely marginally in the green. I'm not even going to call it in the green. It's unchanged, really. It's that energy index, perhaps a little bit of inflationary bet there.
This is setting up, of course, to be one of the broadest sell-offs that we've had year to date, believe it or not, at least the second or third broadest that we've seen right now. Big part of that reason is, draw your eyes to the top of the screen. Agilent Technologies are one of the big decliners in the S&P here on the day. In fact, having its worst day going back at least to the beginning of the pandemic. In fact, a lot of these life sciences and tool companies are really taking it on the chin. And remember, they had rallied pretty hard heading into this year on the idea that they may be recession-proof, but some of the organic revenue targets that they're giving here not really satisfying investors. The flip side of that is Corning, up about 2% here. Pricing power there, a 20% price increase on one of its key products here. Corning says that not only can it give that price increase, but more importantly, is that its customers are going to take it. Netflix shares up about 2% here on the day, and analog devices down about 9%. Also, that's actually the biggest decliner on a percent basis right now in the S&P 500. Of course, one of the largest makers of semiconductors for industrial equipment and cars, giving a forecast here that suggests softness in that space. After the bell, we do get NVIDIA earnings, NVIDIA revenue forecasts, and no one really cares. All they want to hear is about AI, about the hype. 100% run up in this stock, Kriti. Most of that on the back that AI will be its salvation.
Look, earnings matter. The geopolitics matter. I think NVIDIA is such a great encapsulation of that story. But it's
matters.
AI does matter, but in the shelf, kind of falling in the shadow.
Did Matt say that or AI? Because I don't know.
Who knows?
Who knows?
It's all falling in the shadow of the debt ceiling talks. I want to bring you some sound here from what exactly House Kevin McCarthy said to us earlier from Capitol Hill when response to the idea the Biden administration is pushing this clean bill. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I will not put a clean debt ceiling on the floor. Why? Because we've spent more than we've ever spent before, and we have the highest debt than we ever had before. I just don't think that's right. I am not going to give up. We're not going to default. We're going to solve this problem. I will stay with it until we can get it done. But let's be honest about this. We have to spend less than we spent last year.
And it's that last line that I think is really crucial, Matt. The idea here that it's not even about capping the budget. It's not even about a flat line kind of pace when you're talking about the budget. Kevin McCarthy really wants us to cut back when it comes to the debt ceiling. Year over year, flat line just won't do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we just spent what we were already planning on spending, that's too much, right? I mean, we're running $1 trillion deficits. So from their point of view, I should point out, from not mine, they think that's too much spending. The market doesn't seem bothered by it at all. We are seeing this broad sell-off, but we're still at 4,100. Paul, you point out the gains that we've seen year to date. I mean, if you look at the S&P forecasts for the S&P at the year end from strategists, we're already there right now. So you would think that if markets were really worried about a default, there would be a much bigger sell-off, or maybe it's just that they don't know what to do in this kind of situation because we've never seen it.
Yep, so we've got the default issue front and center. We're likely to remain for the next several days, maybe a couple of weeks. But earnings, pretty much, we're done with earnings here. So I think we're going to go back to looking at the Fed, looking at the eco data. We got jobless claims coming up tomorrow. We got the PCE inflation data on Friday, which is clearly what the Fed looks at. So there'll be plenty for the market to digest in the next couple of days while we await a debt ceiling decision.
Well, the question is, what are they digesting, though? I mean, the idea here is that, okay, we're through earnings season, but it really wasn't that great of an earnings season. It wasn't as bad as people feared. But, I mean, looking forward here, is the anticipation in this market for better earnings? Is it for a better economy? And I think right now, one of the reasons why you see such tepid price action out there, even when you X out the X date and all the debate in Washington, is because what's waiting for us once we get past all this?
Yeah, do we actually see that relief rally? If you look at some of the speculative positioning, we're actually seeing the most shorts going all the way back to 2007. So what kind of relief rally will we really see, Matt?
Yeah, I was talking with Anna Hahn, who's an equity strategist from Wells Fargo, earlier today on Bloomberg Television, and she suggested the market expects this debt ceiling issue to be resolved. So that's the rumor that this market has bought. And it's possible that when we get the actual resolution, you could see a sell-off when they sell the news. That wouldn't be a scenario that surprises me, Paul. Buy the rumor, sell the news has been just a constant mantra on Wall Street as long as I've been listening.
And the first mantra I learned on Wall Street, the trading desk at Payne Weber, was don't fight the Fed here. And if I've got a Fed that's done raising rates, that might be all I need. And Gina Martin Adams from Bloomberg Intelligence says that's pretty much it. And that's where we saw the bottom from her perspective in the markets back in the fall.
Point out, most read story still on the terminal right now. It's everything that's going on with this debt ceiling debate.
Tina Turner.
Third most read story, of course, is the passing of Tina Turner. We just learned about that. 83 years old, just passing away. Obviously, one of the best to ever do it out there.
I will always think of the Thunderdome. Everyone, I'm sure, has his or her own thoughts when it comes to Tina Turner. Absolutely an icon, and so she will be greatly missed.
Go back and listen to that Tommy soundtrack and listen to Acid Queen on there.
Really?
All
right. Nice reference there.
Good tip. Yeah. That does it for now. We'll be back together live on television, radio, and YouTube at 4 p.m. for our Beyond the Bell coverage when we take you through today's market close. And a reminder that Bloomberg Business Week is now on Bloomberg Originals. Apparently, around 4 o'clock from Hakeem Jeffries, leader of the Democrats in the House. We've heard from, it seems like Kevin McCarthy is coming out to talk every hour or so. But it does look like they're at an impasse. Of course, it's going to look like that until the 11th hour. That's just the way it works in Washington. So I think we're all used to it, and the markets don't seem terribly rattled. As we pointed out just now, there's a broad sell-off underway, but it's not a lot, right? We're still trading at 41.11. So let's talk with Abigail Doolittle, our markets correspondent from Bloomberg TV, as well as Steve Matthews. He reports on the Fed and the economy for us. Abigail, we'll start with you. As Romaine and Critty were saying, this is a very broad sell-off, but as Paul and I noted, not to a relatively low absolute level.
Not to a relatively low absolute level, but I will say I think that we are starting to move back down in the sideways trend. And I would say that there's even signs that now that sideways trend, early signs, I should say, that sideways trend could break to the downside. And up until just recently, these charts had been neutral to constructive, neutral in terms of the sideways trend, and it had appeared that they were going to break out to the upside. Now, there is a chance that we're going to have both, but I would say that right now the odds are increasing that in the relatively near term, we're going to see the S&P 500 retest 4,000, maybe even go back below. And it feels like this debt ceiling drama, this impasse, this dysfunction that we're seeing is the cause. And a piece of that, Matt, you and I were talking about a great terminal for those who are subscribers, clients of Bloomberg, G#BTD.
We used to call them charts.
Charts.
Yeah, before the kids got here and decided to call them terminals.
Terminals. Okay, so well, here we are. We're looking at a great chart on the terminal chart. I'm not sure, but 7767, and it shows that those T-bills that are maturing this month are commanding yields of 268 and 382 respectively, which actually seems high to me anyway for a week, like a couple days out from the world's biggest economy and the full faith and credit of the government. But that's the point, because those maturing in the first week of June, 7%. So that's like a 3 to 4 to 5% gap for these different bills. And then it's interesting because if you think about the 2-year yield and the 10-year yield, they're commanding like around 4% or a little bit above, a little bit below. So it tells you that there's this very specific time period where folks are nervous that the U.S. may default on these particular bills. And I think we're starting to see these jitters in stocks. Now, that said, I will say it's on below average volume, the selling we're seeing.
Yeah, so it's interesting here. I think that it's so new for so many people in the market. What does it mean? How will it actually play out? Where will we see the pain if we have a default? Is it just going to be a day, in which case we'll like, hey, we'll pay you tomorrow? So there's so much unknowns as to how this will actually occur.
Also,
I'm afraid that people will in fact freak out if we get to that point.
I have to say, just thinking back to 2011, we didn't default, but the brinkmanship went right to the edge. Our credit rating, the credit rating in the U.S. was downgraded, and there was a brief bear market for all of the markets. Now, that was sort of the low before we had a 10-year bull market, but if we were to default, I agree, there's more questions than not. I've been reading so many different articles in terms of what it would actually look like, but the specificity of it is so interesting. But I think it would be a cross-asset sell-off.
Steve Matthews, let me go to you in Atlanta and ask, can there be different kinds of defaults? Republicans have suggested, Treasury could simply stop paying government employees' salaries. Would it be possible to only pay, the interest and the debt due with the money that we have left?
You see lots of scenarios being kicked around on Wall Street, and there are views from that this would be just the worst thing in the world to, maybe there would be a way to finesse this either through, paying some things or, there are lots of alternatives that the administration has. And the administration's view and the Treasury's view has been, we're not talking about any of these things because, they're focused on the negotiations and getting something passed. But presumably there are some things that they could do at the last minute. At least that's the view on Wall Street, and maybe that's why nobody in the markets is really panicking yet. There's a view that if they get past the middle of the month, that they will get more tax money in, and they could push it beyond another few weeks. So we'll see.
Well, Steve, they've got all my tax money I'm going to pay this year, so they better not be depending upon me anymore. But so, Steve, what does it mean from a global perspective? So much of the world's markets are priced off of, a lot of the U.S. markets, the U.S. Treasury markets, the full faith and credit that is just assumed out there of the United States. Do we see, other parts of the world really starting to get nervous here?
You really haven't seen that yet. As your guest pointed out, you've seen just these very short-term Treasury yields move up, and that does have an impact. We're paying more money out because of higher yields in the short term. So it's like that's taxpayer money that's going down the drain. But from an international standpoint, the U.S. is viewed, as the reserve currency. That's really not in any doubt. The other currencies that might be considered reserve currencies have got, such as the euro or the China yuan or the yen, they've got problems. So, even whatever happens, the U.S. is still going to be viewed as very much, an important leadership market in the world. So it's hard to see that going away.
Abigail, I am looking at a note from Scott Sosnick. He's the chief strategist over at Interactive Brokers, and he thinks there's also a possibility that we could see a sell the news event on a resolution. How much do you think the market has bought the rumor of, the debt ceiling being raised?
That's such an interesting hypothesis, and I'm pretty good friends with him, too, and we interview him frequently on Options Insight.
I heard the same thing from Anna Hahn this morning at Wells Fargo. She said the market believes that this will be resolved, and so has bought that rumor, so to speak, and could possibly sell the news on a resolution.
So I would agree with the piece that the market has believed that there would be resolution. I think any person with a reasonable amount of common sense would believe that there will be resolution, except for the fact that right now we don't have it. Just from the standpoint of having observed markets for, I will say, longer than I would care to share, but at least a couple decades here, I'm kind of shocked by, it feels like it's starting to get priced in. This 2-day decline that we're seeing, about 2% over the last 2 days, the worst 2 days since April, the last time I looked. I feel like investors are starting to get nervous. Those T-bill investors are certainly starting to get nervous. They're asking to be paid up for.
Just a little bit, right? I mean, how do you price in the death of the global financial system? That's not 50 points off the S&P.
Well, this is the interesting thing. To Steve's point, there's all kinds of nuances around this. We don't know exactly what it could look like. And to your question, I mean, they could choose to not pay pensioners and government employees and pay these bonds. Now, would that be the right thing to do from an optics level or even an ethical point? Probably not, but it is one possibility that's being discussed as a potential solution. I think that if there's a resolution, I don't think that we see a sell-off. I think that if this stalemate continues, you're going to continue to see this selling. And then in the past, at least, in 2013, and then I think it was also, 2018?
Yep.
There was a sell-off into it, and then when it was raised, it was increased. I mean, the closest thing that we have to a default to my market experience is 2011. And again, there was a bear market when it was raised, but there was the downgrade.
Hey, Steve, go ahead,
it's
Steve.
funny that there's some feeling on part of Wall Street that if there were a little bit of panic right now, that would be positive. I mean, sometimes it's taken panic and stock sell-offs to get the politicians to get their act together and get something done. You saw that
like TARP.
with TARP.
Yeah.
Exactly. That was exactly the scenario with TARP, and you had it with previous debt ceilings. So, the fact that there has been no real serious market reaction is, in a way, maybe negative in that the politicians aren't feeling the pressure.
So, I mean, Steve, just real quickly, 30 seconds. How do you think our friends at the Federal Reserve, how are they viewing all this stuff going on in Washington?
The minutes came out today. They said that if there were a default, it would have severely adverse consequences. That's Fed speak for the U.S. economy. And Chris Waller was asked about it today by our reporter and said basically there's not much that the Fed can do about it. I mean, if the politicians screw it up, the Fed is not going to be blamed for it.
All right, Steve Matthews, our economics reporter out of Atlanta. Thanks very much for joining us. And Abigail Doolittle, Bloomberg Television markets reporter. Appreciate you coming in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio as well, talking about what happens after the resolution, if there's a resolution of this debt ceiling issue. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got a leg higher now for the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ. They're well off session lows. To be clear, still in the red, but all of a sudden a move higher. This update brought to you by BNY Mellon Insight, June 6th through the 8th in Orlando. Do not miss the essential event for the financial advice community. Visit insight.bnymellon.com. Right now, stocks are lower with a 19-point drop for the S&P 500 index, but I stress off session lows, down by about 0.5%. We've got the Dow down 158, a drop there of 0.5%. NASDAQ lower by 55, a decline of 0.4%. 10-year yield 3.72%, with the 2-year that's yielding 4.35%. Gold $19.58 the ounce, down $16 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude higher by 1.1%, $73.77 a barrel on WTI. Bitcoin down 3.2%, 26,337. Nvidia will be among the names reporting after the close of trading today. Nvidia shares right now are down by 0.8%. And Citigroup is abandoning its attempt to sell Banamex and will instead hold an IPO for the Mexican unit in 2025. Citigroup down 2.7%. Recapping, S&P pairing losses now down by 20 points, down 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie Pello, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Matt, boy, you can't be a good time to be a central banker these days. You're raising rates everywhere. I don't care if you're at the Fed or the Bank of England or the ECB. Nobody wants to talk to you. Nobody's somebody at the dinner parties. No. You know, you're not getting the Christmas cards because you're raising rates and you're making life tough for people. But nowhere it seems it's more difficult to be a central banker than in Brazil. So let's bring in the reporter on this story, Maria Eloisa Capuro, Brazil economics reporter for Bloomberg News. She joins us on Zoom from our Sao Paulo bureau, and this is a big take story. And Matt and I love the big take stories on the Bloomberg terminal because they're so well researched and written. So, Maria, tell us what's going on in Brazil. The president and the head of the central bank there, they're not on the same page, are they?
Yeah, well, I'm coming from you right from Brasilia, actually, which is where the central bank is based, the political capital of Brazil. So here in Brazil, interest rates are basically at a 6-year high, close to 14%, and they have been steady since September. We have to remember that Brazil was one of the first central banks to hike rates in the midst of the pandemic, and it's slowly working out because we are seeing that inflation is easing from 12% peak last year to around 4%, but it's still very much above the central bank's target. And, you know, the team led by Roberto Campos Neto, who is the central bank chief here, has given at this point no indication that they plan to cut rates or haven't even discussed that. And they're getting a political heat from that because President Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva, who took over in January, is not liking that scenario at all.
Well, you have also a very colorful person in office, as you tend to do in Brazil, but this guy just got out of the big house, right? Lula spent some time in prison for corruption and then was reelected as president, which is an amazing story by itself. Now he is really attacking Neto, the head of the central bank. Is there any way that Neto just says, okay, you rather have inflation? I'll just cut rates again. I mean, Lula would be in a horrible position if that happened as well, wouldn't he?
Well, we have to remember that Lula is president now for the 3rd time, but it's the first time that he's dealing with an autonomous central bank. The law that grants autonomy to the central bank here in Brazil is relatively new. It was approved in 2021. So this is the first time that Lula comes into office with a president of the central bank that he didn't himself choose. And the thing is that also Lula, during his campaign, he made a big point of promising to deliver prosperity, economic prosperity specifically. And now we're seeing that most analysts are betting that growth is going to be much lower than last year. It's going to be around 1%. And that is, you know, going straight into not what he promised, not what Lula promised, which was, we were all going to have beer and beef, fairly easy. And I think the main thing that Lula is seeing right now is that his obstacle is interest rates at a really high level. But on the other side, Campos Neto has been arguing that there's reasons for them to hold the rate steady. And it's reasons that in some cases I think are similar to other countries, and especially in advanced economies, because core measures, when you strip out energy prices and some food items, they are running pretty high. And most analysts still believe that consumer price increases are going to accelerate beyond the central bank's goal, even like all through 2025. So they are not seeing at this point a space to deliver an easing cycle that is sustainable and that is credible.
So, Maria, in your story, I really like the part about this meat packer, Minerva SA. It's tough to get some financing in Brazil. I mean, these higher rates are really impacting businesses. And so you've got a story about this meat packing company. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and not only the meat packer, we also talked to a businessman who had a toy store business there, with 400 employees, and it was getting harder for him as well. Like, he actually told us that it was easier for him in the sense that it was cheaper for him to get a personal loan than a business loan for his company. And the thing is that in this political battle that we're seeing between Lula and the central bank chief, the people that are caught in the middle are households. We're seeing from even central bank stats itself, levels of household debt that are nearing record highs, interest rates that are rising. This is a country where I know you're not going to believe me, but this is the truth. Interest rates on credit cards are 400%. Wow. So yeah, really, really high. So we are seeing that businesses are taking a toll out of this. But at the same time, that's how monetary policy works, right? It tries to slow down the economy, mainly through the credit channel. So we're seeing the impacts of that.
Well, don't put anything on your credit card. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Or if you do, pay it off when
I pay my credit bills on time, so I'm fine.
Yeah. The toy maker story was great. Well, bad in that the toy maker got stiffed by Marissa Lojas. What is that? Like a department store, right? And so a lot of these people, he had to take a personal loan. The meat packer is supplying its suppliers with cash right now, giving them loans. How long is this going to last? How long does Campos Neto say he's going to have to keep rates high before he brings inflation down? Which we should point out isn't that high, right? It was 12%, which is unbearably high. It's now 4%, which is getting closer and closer to normal.
Yeah, but their goal is 3%, and the inflation expectations are still pointing that inflation is going to pick up to around 6% by the end of this year, and they're going to run above the target through 2025. So at this point, we don't have from the central bank communication any clear signal that they have discussed rate cuts. What we have is from investors and markets expectations. Most people are betting that the first rate cut is going to come in August, September, something like that. The government on the side of Lula da Silva is working to create that space as well for the central bank to lower rates. They're just discussing a bill to shore up public finances that, if it is finally approved in Congress, could also open the space for rate cuts, but nowhere near, the last months of the year. So we're thinking second half of the year, possibly.
Right. So, Maria, how are these economic challenges? Are they impacting the standing of President Lula at all? Is this becoming something he has to get really worried about?
Well, he is worried in the sense that, one of his main promises in the campaign was that, economic prosperity, and the fact that he won an election by a very thin margin, I think it's putting more pressure on him to deliver on some of his promises. So we are seeing, yes, like in the side of the government, this push, this hastiness to deliver on this economic prosperity and other promises that they did on the campaign. We are seeing as well in analysts, on the back of better agriculture numbers, revise up their estimates for economic growth this year, but still like relatively, like slowly that it was like last year. They're revising up to around 1.5%, and last year it was close to 3%. So we're still very far away from that.
All right, Maria, thanks so much for joining us. Maria Eloisa Capurro there, talking to us from Brasilia about what's going on in terms of, their president attacking their central bank leader. It's a situation you could imagine in a number of regions. I don't think President...
Yeah, we had that several years back.
We had it with President Trump. Right. President Biden, I don't think would do it so publicly, but we have had senators do it, right? Elizabeth Warren is pretty Lula da Silva in the way she attacks Jerome Powell in our Fed.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we'll have to see. They're supposed to be independent, but this is the Big Take story, and you can check that out on the terminal on Bloomberg.com/Big Take.
All right, let's get a check on the latest world and national news. For that, we go to Nancy Lyons in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Nancy?
Thanks, Matt. Tina Turner has died at the age of 83. Her manager says the music legend died peacefully in Switzerland after a long illness. Turner was known as the Queen of Rock and Roll and rose to prominence as the lead singer of the Ike and Tina Turner Revue in the 1960s. She left Ike after years of abuse and launched a successful career as a solo performer. Negotiations are continuing and raising the debt ceiling before a June 1st deadline. Talks have been going on for several hours this afternoon. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy spoke with reporters ahead of that meeting.
I am not going to give up. We're not going to default. We're going to solve this problem. I will stay with it until we can get it done.
McCarthy did not outline what concessions he's willing to make in order to reach an agreement, and Democratic Congressman Mark Pecan says that's the problem.
You actually have to go to the table and negotiate, otherwise you're squatting, and that's all the Republicans have done to this point, and we're awfully close to the deadline for squatting.
Congressman Pecan tells Bloomberg the Republican plan to make spending cuts of 22% to all non-defense programs will never get past the Democrats. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has jumped into the presidential race. He's filed the paperwork today ahead of a formal announcement in a Twitter Spaces event this evening hosted by Elon Musk. Wendy Schiller is a political science professor at Brown University. She tells Bloomberg DeSantis does have a lane he can take in this presidential race.
Ron DeSantis can say, look, I am the younger, quote unquote, prettier version of Donald Trump, and I don't have any of the baggage. Look at my family, look at my record, I've been a governor. If you're a Republican, I am the much better bet, and I'm not under indictment.
Again, Brown University professor Wendy Schiller. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries.
news, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 3:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, and the Russell 2000 all trading lower. Let us head right over to the First Word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. And here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks in the red from the start amid the debt ceiling talks. The Dow is currently down 190 points. S&P's dropped 22, and NASDAQ is off by 55. The U.S. 10-year yield at 3.73%. Gold is down 15. Oil trading in the green. And Bitcoin is lower by 3.3%. Of the main 11 S&P sectors, only energy and consumer discretionary were in the green. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, Salesforce and UNH, while 3M fell 3% to its lowest level since 2013. After earnings, Kohl's rose 8%, and in the activist space, Janet plans a proxy fight at Freshpet. Wrapping things up, NVIDIA and Snowflake report after the bell. Live from the First Breaking News Desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill Maloney. And sources tell Bloomberg prosecutors are reviewing stock trading by some of First Republic Bank's employees during the lender's recent collapse. To hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type SQUAWK, S-Q-U-A, on your Bloomberg terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, this is the Drive to the Close. I'm Matt Miller in for Tim Stenevec, Paul Sweeney in for Carol Masser, and we want to welcome in Eric Clark. He's a portfolio manager at Rational Dynamic Brands Fund on Zoom from San Diego to talk to us about the market action and his expectations and strategy. Yeah. Can people live in San Diego?
I think just visit San Diego.
Wait, can't you? Don't you have to be like a naval aviator to live there? Do they have other industry, Eric?
That was a former life. Yeah, there's a lot of biotech. That's about it, though. A lot of surfing.
The luckiest people in the world live in San Diego. All right, so that sounds awesome. But the situation that we're in here on the East Coast, specifically in Washington, D.C., is not so great. What's your take on the debt ceiling standoff?
Well, they are very predictable, aren't they? They love to wait until the last minute and keep kicking the can down the road, and all of us have to be held hostage by all of their crazy actions.
All right, let's say we get to the other side of this. Do I want to be offensive or defensive? Because I have a lot of strategists saying there's still a lot of unknowns out there. You want to stay defensive, maybe some big cap names, some dividend paying names, some fortress balance sheets. How do you think about it?
I mean, we're brands and consumer investors, so the nature of being a mega brand is that they tend to be very high quality companies anyway. So we're pretty balanced by kind of offense and defense currently. So we have some good staples and healthcare exposure, but we also have some good exposure to traditional consumer spending brands that are a little more offense, growth oriented, a little higher beta. So I like the balance for now.
All right, so your brands oriented Rational Dynamic Brands Fund. We have the clue there. What are the mega brands that you like? What are the mega brands that we should be paying the most attention to?
Well, I mean, it depends on what part of consumption we're talking about, but I mean, across tech, Apple,
Uh-oh.
See? Lost.
He froze. Or he's taking a pause to collect his thoughts.
I think he's back.
No, he looks still frozen to me. Look,
oh, he's frozen. Okay.
Completely frozen.
I see what you're looking at. You're looking at the Zoom thing.
Yeah, I can see
him. Oh, and
him.
he's got like the pine tree, ocean
I feel
backdrop
like
on
that's
his
probably
Zoom.
just a background.
There we go. We got you, buddy.
Eric, we got you back. Okay,
Yeah,
we
I'm
lost
here.
you for a second. You were talking about the big tech mega trends. You said Apple, and I think you were about to say Amazon. Then you froze up.
Oh, Apple, Amazon, Meta, the old Facebook, and then the traditional Microsoft, Google, those kinds in the tech world. but then there's great brands in consumer, with Costco or Nike or Lulu, and many of those are on sale currently too.
Eric, before we went on, I was just telling Matt, I just downloaded to my phone the movie Air about Nike and the Air Jordans. So I'm looking forward to watching that on my long commute back to the Jersey Shore tonight, which I'll stack up against San Diego anytime, by the way. So when
Not in the winter, dude.
You've got Nike on your list for very good reason, arguably one of the greatest brands out there. What's the risk to a company that's so dependent upon a brand? But boy, you got to protect that. If something goes wrong, oh boy, I don't know how you recover. So how do you guys think about that risk, the risk to a brand?
Well, I think, one of the things we monitor and measure, as much as possible is brand relevancy. And we kick out things that are becoming irrelevant. Let's think of Under Armour, and let's keep focusing on the things that are just in the top of consumers' mind. And you look at revenue, you look at free cash flow, you look at market share, all that kind of data speaks to which brands are still staying relevant. And the good news is, if you're still relevant and you're still an important consumer spending category, then even when the stocks are on sale, that eventually consumers will start spending there. And so Nike is clearly the most relevant brand across all sectors. I mean, it's just so dominant that they were able to focus more on direct to consumer because the brand's so powerful. I don't necessarily need to go to Foot Locker, which is rapidly becoming irrelevant.
So I'm more of a Walmart guy, Eric, but of course, Matt's all about the luxury brands. He's very comfortable down, Madison Avenue, Fifth Avenue. I see LVMH is on your list there. And I would think luxury, just generally speaking, would be a really good China reopening play. Is that kind of how you're looking at it?
It is, but it's just more of it's an upper income, wealthy consumer. As consumers start to make more money, there's these aspirational brands that people love, and Hermes and a lot of the brands under Louis Vuitton. I put Lulu into kind of the mass market aspirational brand, but that would be up there like a Ferrari as well. So there's we tend to focus on lower income. What are they using from a needs perspective? I would put Walmart into that category, and then in the middle income group, and then the upper income group, and then all the way up to the wealthy. And so when you can extract great brands from each one of those different income brackets, that tends to be a pretty good portfolio overall.
Is there a segment of the consumer that you're worried about? I mean, someone who's buying a Ferrari, I'm not worried about no matter what kind of recession we have. But, someone who now could afford Lululemon may not be able to in 5 or 6 months.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, within the portfolio, I would say that we're not nearly as broad as we normally are across spending categories because consumers, we've all been overspending for the last 18 months. And eventually, one, we get tired of it, and two, we can't keep doing it. So then we have to separate what do I absolutely have to have? Usually groceries, general merchandise, food, and then what do I want to do that I'm willing to spend, my money on here, and then let's avoid the things that we're deferring, like maybe more, even in home improvement. Lowe's and Home Depot have struggled the last couple of quarters, furniture, electronics, things like that. So we're, with better prices, then I'll be getting more broadly exposed to some of those categories again. But for now, we're really focused on things that have resilience that are discretionary and that we absolutely have to have, like we're going to a concert that we love, and then things we need via, going out to restaurants and doing some summer vacation and the staples of life, if you will.
All right, Eric, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Eric Clark, he's a portfolio manager at Rational Dynamic Brands Fund. That's a really cool strategy here, focusing on big brands. He joins us on Zoom from sunny San Diego. But if you put up the next 10 days in San Diego versus the Jersey Shore, I'm just saying.
You like the shore, right?
Exactly.
I'll tell you what, one time I did a Ducati motorcycle ride out in San Diego. And it was like a 3-hour, 4-hour, amazing ride through the canyons behind. It's just an awesome place to ride.
Yeah, it is. And it's just, you go down there, it's just one of the most special places anywhere is that whole greater San Diego area, La Jolla, just some good stuff. So people living the good life there.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Sources tell Bloomberg prosecutors are reviewing stock trading by some of First Republic Bank's employees during the lender's recent collapse. Those sources say the Justice Department is looking at whether anyone working at the firm used inside information in transactions as it was crumbling in the second biggest bank failure in American history. We were just talking about brand names, and today look at shares of Abercrombie & Fitch. They are now surging by 30.8%. This after the company reported stronger than expected first quarter profit, and it boosted its outlook for the full year. The results suggest that despite economic uncertainty, some shoppers are still willing to spend on items like clothing. Kohl's soared after it reported a surprise profit and addressed bloated inventories in the first quarter. Early signs that the new CEO's efforts are paying off. Kohl's shares up today by 7.5%. Also surging after earnings, Urban Outfitters. That stock now up by 17.7%. So what is next for retailers? Brendan Case covers the industry for Bloomberg News.
I'm going to watch Best Buy and Costco on Thursday. A lot of signals there about discretionary spending and higher-end consumers.
And indeed, we've got Best Buy shares down by about 0.4%. Costco shares, they are now lower by just about 0.4%. We are minutes away from the closing bell. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the red. I'm Charlie Pellet. Those are some of our top corporate stories, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stenivek on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Paul Sweeney, Matt Miller sitting in for Tim Stenivek and Carol Massar, listening to Bloomberg Business Week here. And Matt, we've got the close coming up, and after the close today, NVIDIA is going to report numbers, big chip maker. I mean, just look at the stock. I mean, just pull up the Bloomberg quote on the stock. The stock is up, let's call it 109% year to date. It's added nearly $400 billion in market value just this year. So you don't see that hardly at all, although we've got Meta's got a similar kind of performance this year.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up Meta, because what I do is I type up SPX index, and then I do an MRR there. That's member ranked returns. So if you do SPX index MRR go, and then you change the period to year to date, you can see that NVIDIA and Meta are swapping the first place position back and forth. Right now, NVIDIA is the winner year to date, as you point out, up 109%, 108.75 to be exact.
Oh yeah, very cool.
Meta's up 106.91%. But the interesting thing here is, so Meta makes as much revenue in one quarter as NVIDIA does for a whole year.
Yeah.
So NVIDIA is a much smaller company in terms of revenue, but NVIDIA is now a bigger company in terms of market cap. In fact, it's a much bigger company in terms of market cap. Meta has a market cap of about $640 billion. NVIDIA is $755 billion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just monster stocks, monster performances this year after a brutal last year.
And monster valuations. Sure. You know, Meta is trading at only 22 or 23 times earnings.
That's not too bad.
That's especially for one of these big tech stocks, right?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, NVIDIA is trading at 133 times earnings.
Well, this apparently is what do we talk about? Every company, every day, AI.
Yes.
And if people are saying, how do I play AI? One of the names that people throw out there is just by NVIDIA, because their chips are really good for that chat GPT thing and AI in general. And in the absence of any pure play AI story or stories, NVIDIA, to a lesser extent Microsoft, and are just plays here. So the reason I bring it up is when they report numbers after the close today, man, they have a lot to live up to. I mean, you know, the expectations, just looking at the stock would tell you they need to really, put up some big numbers, but put up some big guidance, I think, in terms of to support this big move we've seen in the stock. So that'll coming up in just minutes.
Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romain Bostic alongside Kriti Gupta. We're counting you down to the closing bell, and here to help take us beyond the bell. It's a global simulcast with Matt Miller and Paul Sweeney. Welcome to our audiences across Bloomberg Television, Radio Originals, and those folks streaming us on YouTube. Stocks are pretty much, I think, where they were last time we spoke, Matt, here. Pretty deep in the red, as a lot of people still trying to figure out what's going on in Washington.
Yeah, many of them, although NVIDIA was down 2% last time we spoke, and it's now only off 0.5%. The reason I note that is because when I was looking at it earlier, it was up 105% year to date, and Paul just pointed out it's up 109% year to date. So it continues to put up bigger and bigger gains. It is now the biggest gainer in the S&P, above Facebook. None of the other companies on the index have done better. So we get the earnings out later, and I'm truly excited to see what they have to say.
Yeah, looking at the action today, you know, we have the S&P off 0.8%, and similar on the Dow and the NASDAQ. But, you know, the volume is, you know, a little bit light today. It wasn't like a monster volume day, a little bit lighter than usual. So it's not like you felt any rush and panic selling here. It just seemed like a reasonable selling off day today. Again, maybe reflecting the continued uncertainty coming out of Washington.
Yeah, definitely the softness here. I think it's also interesting to see what we're seeing in the yield space. The two-year yield still ticking higher, though that seems to be based more on what we got out of the Fed minutes. But at the shortest end of the curve here, you're definitely seeing some anxiety or maybe opportunity, depending on how you look at it. You're paying something like 6.5%, 7% in the secondary market for anything that matures around that so-called X date. Let's get to the closing bell numbers here in New York. It takes a while for these numbers to settle, but overall, we know the story. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down about 250 points or 0.8%. The S&P down around 30 points or 0.7%. The NASDAQ composite looks like it's going to finish the day lower by 0.6%. And the relative laggard on the day right now, guys, is the Russell 2000 down 1.1%.
All right, so a lot of losers there on a day when most of the companies on the S&P 500 were down. I actually took a look at some of the top losers, or the companies that were pulling the most points away from the S&P 500. Most of them don't really have a reason, right? A sinking tide means all of the boats in the harbor drop. But Microsoft, at least according to Sky News, is going to appeal the UK decision to block its purchase of Activision. It's a $69 billion purchase. I guess now Sky is saying it's a $75 billion purchase of Activision. Whatever the exact number is, it's huge. And investors may be a little bit uncomfortable that Microsoft is going to throw more money at that. So that stock has at least some of a reason to fall. Intuit is also falling. It's one of the biggest losers in terms of point deductions from the S&P 500 after it came out with revenue that was a little bit lighter than the street expected. We should point out that they beat on the profit side, and they also raised their full-year forecast, but that wasn't enough to please investors today, who, in the face of a declining market, decided to sell into it as well.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned exactly what's declining here, because I want to show you on a sector basis just how much pain you're seeing. It's interesting because you're seeing some of those actual kind of financials, those real estate companies, really taking the brunt of the hit. But take a look at what's winning, Matt. The idea here that energy and consumer discretionary, both in the green, ending the day higher, but energy really kind of the sole outperformer here. Last time I saw that, where you see tech and energy rallying together, that is a defensive trade bracing for inflation, Paul.
Yeah, on a heavy tape today, there were some winners there. And, I was interested to see some of the tech names, the big cap tech names that have really led the rally again so far this year in 2023. They were also the ones that were able to eke out some gains today. And the names that we all know: Amazon, Apple, Meta, Netflix. After, stocks selling off 40, 50, 60% last year, we've got big moves up on a year-to-date basis. And I also want to just call out ExxonMobil. That was also in the green today. And you look down at WTI crude and you see oil trading higher by about 1.3% here. So WTI crude at just under $74 a barrel, moving a little bit higher, taking some of those energy names with it.
Let's take a quick look at what's going on in the yield space here. Pretty much higher on the yield space across the curve. That cheapening continues here, despite some of the efforts here to actually buy back in to the Treasury space. The two-year yield at 4.36 and change right now. Your 10-year yield still camped out around 3.7, and it's not there on your screen, but we should point out when you go to the shorter end of the curve, a 6-month bill is getting you about 5.4% at new issuance here, and in the secondary market, anything around that X date, around June 6 or so, you're paying around 6.5% to 7%, or at least that's what you get if you're brave enough to take that on.
By the way, I'm looking at a headline just crossing the terminal here. Stratasys said to be in talks to buy the 3D printer Desktop Metal in an all-stock deal. It would create a 3D printing company, according to people familiar with this matter who declined to be identified because it's still private. It would be the leader in 3D printing, which I always think is kind of interesting. Desktop Metal as a stock is up 28% year to date. So if they have a premium on top of that, it could be a big jump for this company.
You know, Romain, you were just calling out some of the yield curve here, and I don't know about you guys, but after last year when equity investors were down double digits, fixed income markets were down double digits, I don't mind sticking around for a couple of years and getting 4.36%. That doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world.
Well, I mean, we talked to so many people on television side. I'm sure you talked to them on radio too. They're saying the same thing. Some of these big fixed income managers. I mean, look. I remember. I feel like just maybe a year or two ago we were joking about how these were kind of the most shunned people in the room. I mean, nobody wanted to talk to those guys, and now they are basically the prom kings and queens right now.
Well, Romain, speaking of shunned, you love to talk about that T-bill, that June 1st T-bill, 7% yield. Imagine the folks who are actually buying those T-bills right now. When this unwinds, I feel like those are going to be the winners.
I just want to point out too, just real quickly, because we are, of course, focusing on the debt ceiling negotiations, and the latest daily cash balance of the Treasury is out. We should just point out that it actually did tick up just a little bit. We're actually now around 76 billion, right now, and change in that main fund that the Treasury uses to pay its bills. That's up from about 68 billion on Monday. Remember, this is backwards looking by about 1 day.
And I think the question, as I understand it now, is can we make it to June 15th, right? We've heard Yellen say June 1st is the X date. She's obviously a very political animal in her position right now. Others are saying June 6th. But if we could make it to June 15th, then we'd get another month's worth of tax revenue. I'm not sure if that's a possibility, but I guess we'll see. If the president doesn't bend, if McCarthy doesn't bend, we're going to have to get there.
All right, still earnings crossing the wire here. Earnings season never stops. Snowflake out, those shares down about 10%. Here are your first quarter numbers coming in. Revenue, $623.6 million. The Street, it was actually looking for 609 and change. That is a beat. When you talk about adjusted EPS and you talk about some of those numbers, it looks like a slight miss on those. Here's the forecast going forward, and a big part of the reason why you're seeing the shares down. Fiscal 2Q product revenue, 620 to 625 million. That's the range the company is giving. On average, the Street was looking for 646. That would be a miss. Second quarter adjusted operating margin looks like they're giving guidance for about 2%. That would also be a miss. And for the full year, product revenue, 2.6 to 2.7 billion. The Street was looking for 2.7 billion. So on average, they're looking at the top end of that range. So you could call that a bit of a miss as well.
Yeah, and Romain, at the same time, we're also getting earnings coming out of Splunk, ticker SPLK for our radio audience. Shares dropping after hours, down about 8%, and $89 a share stock. Look, some mixed numbers here. They had those revenue numbers coming in higher, but the adjusted EPS, we're looking at 18 cents versus a loss of a share of 32 cents. Still unclear where the pain actually is, given that the second quarter revenue estimate actually came in higher, an upper range of 895 million relative to an estimate of just 870 million.
All right, we're getting more headlines on the debt ceiling, McCarthy. Well, I feel like McCarthy comes out and talks every hour or so.
What did he say?
He says, we are in a room right now negotiating.
Okay, well,
that's good.
That's good.
Is he saying that from the room, or I'm confused?
They're not having class outside?
Maybe he's on Fox Business right now.
Well, we should point out there is another headline here where he does say, I think things are going a little bit better. Look, I know we're sort of parsing every single word that these guys are saying, and who knows what to believe here. But I guess you want to hear that they are talking, and they are at least willing to signal publicly some degree of optimism.
And remember, we got to echo some of the comments that Kevin McCarthy said earlier today, which is, look, I do not believe the U.S. government will default. So he is still very confident that this deal is going to come through, and these talks that are inching millimeter by millimeter will eventually end positively, Matt.
Snowflake, the headline now read, it sees full year product revenue at $2.6 billion. So pulling it down from the previous forecast of $2.71 billion. By the way, I wasn't in country when Snowflake became a thing. Did we all think that was a good idea, this name? What is that supposed to mean, Snowflake? Are they special? Do they get a medal? Why is it Snowflake? Does anyone know?
That's like a Paul Sweeney question.
It's better than Splunk, isn't it?
I don't know which I prefer. In any case, that does it for our cross-platform coverage of markets on Bloomberg Television, Radio, and YouTube. And a reminder that Bloomberg Business Week is now available on Bloomberg Originals as well. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time and the same place. Down to the 11th hour, the 59th minute, and the 59th second. That's just how it works.
I don't know. And it's day by day we're looking at the cash in the coffers, I guess. So, all right, let's switch and let's talk about a little something fun, a little bit something new, and that is the metaverse. That's something that we associate with Meta, the company. Facebook actually changed their names, go figure, from Facebook to Meta, even though Facebook is still 99.9% of the company's revenue. But you go figure. A consultant got involved there at some point, I'm sure. Dan O'Brien joins us. He's the president of the Americas for HTC. He joins us live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Dan, you guys got a lot of experience in this, i.e. a few years, just kind of the metaverse. What does the metaverse... And I'm speaking for all metaverse shareholders here. Okay. And I own like lots of stock. Let's say I'm a big institutional shareholder. I don't know what my company's name means. What is the metaverse to you?
That's super interesting. The metaverse is really this long-term vision, right, where we interact in a digital space together, much like we do with the internet today. You will be able to use this in the future with products and wearables and glasses that do things like augmented reality, virtual reality, all at the same time. We're in a space of the metaverse today that's very applicable to enterprise businesses, real-world applications.
You're doing it already. That's the idea, right?
Yes.
I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, I think, if I can speculate a little, Paul, I'm going to say they were in a period where they just didn't want to be called Facebook anymore. It kind of sucked to be Facebook at that time, so they picked a new name, any name, and that's where they landed. They're not really doing metaverse stuff yet, except for the fact that they had bought Oculus Rift.
And they're spending gobs of money.
And they're spending a ton of money on it. But, Dan, you guys at HTC are already doing things, right? You're allowing... pilots to practice fighter jets or brain surgeons to practice messing around in your head with what? Headsets?
So we build virtual reality products, also mixed reality products, which is a wearable glasses that much just like glasses, where you can actually interact with the real world objects as well as digital objects, right? But we have been doing this for the last 6+ years, and we have been working in healthcare with doctors, nurses, training, simulation, healthcare with rehabilitation. We have made improvements in speed of training, speed of learning. We have made significant improvements in just overall performance, human performance. And that's what our brand actually stands for. It actually stands for innovation, technology, and humanity. And we want to bring value to a lot of real-world applications for immersive solutions.
So if I were going to compare what you're doing at HTC to another company, I wouldn't choose Meta.
No.
I would choose Apple. And what I assume the direction I assume they're going to go with whatever product they come out with whenever they do. You're looking to actually apply it to human lives in the way we can use them today, not like I can have a tail and bounce around some fantasy land, right?
Yeah, I think, initially, too, there is that fun gaming and entertainment side of it, but we have a lot of gaming and entertainment products out there vying for our attention. I think and also we assume our customers are using it to benefit them. They are not the product.
Let me just break in here because Hakeem Jeffries, head of the Democrats in the House, is speaking right now. Let's listen to what he has to say.
But yet 3 times, House Democrats worked with the Trump administration without gamesmanship, partisanship, brinksmanship to make sure that America did not default and that we paid our bills. So why are things different right now? Why are House Republicans being so unreasonable and so extreme? Unfortunately, we can only really draw one conclusion as we are on the brink of default. House Republicans are determined to either extract deep, painful cuts that will hurt the health, the safety, or the well-being of everyday Americans, or crash the economy, default on our debt, and trigger a painful recession. Those are the two options that House Republicans see as the only viable paths forward. Not our words, Donald Trump's words. The extreme wing of the House Republican Conference's words. Matt Gaetz's words. The American people should understand that House Republicans are determined to accomplish one of two objectives: deep, extreme, painful cuts that will hurt the health, the safety, and the economic well-being of the American people, hurt veterans, hurt disabled children, hurt teachers, hurt Social Security recipients, hurt people who desperately need nutrition assistance, or default on our debt. And many House Republicans have made their position clear. House Republicans are determined to crash the economy because they believe it will benefit them politically. That is the only explanation for their extreme and inherently unreasonable behavior. Catherine Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. So here we are, just days away from economic catastrophe, days away from higher mortgage payments, car loans, gutted retirement accounts, days away from losing 8 million jobs. Why? Because House Republicans have decided to default on America. So let's set the record straight. 1, this is a battle between extremism and common sense. From the beginning, the White House has put forward reasonable solutions. On March 9th, the president released a budget that invests in the success of families and businesses while cutting the deficit by $3 trillion. Republicans waited until April 25th to respond with their Default on America bill. Extreme cuts to veterans' health care, to child care, to first responders, to teachers, to the hungry people in this country, all to fund payouts for polluters and for those who want to cheat on their taxes. This is not normal. This is a hostage situation. Even Matt Gaetz recognized that today. He said Republicans don't feel like we should negotiate with our hostage. Speaker McCarthy and Patrick McHenry both admitted that avoiding default is the only concession they're willing to offer. And who has the GOP taken hostage? It's not the White House, it's not Congress, it's not Democrats, it's the American people. They want the American people to make an impossible choice. Devastating cuts or devastating default. Decimate food assistance or gut seniors' retirement savings. Pull kids out of childcare or destroy their parents' livelihoods. Cut $2 billion from veterans' health care or wipe out 8 million jobs. This is also not about debt, and it is not about spending. What's the evidence? As the leader just laid out, Republicans racked up $8 trillion in debt under Donald Trump, 1/4 of everything we owe in 4 short years. And at the same time, Republicans raised the debt ceiling 3 times, no strings attached. They don't care about spending. They care what ends up in the pockets of the wealthy and the well-connected.
Here you're hearing the Democrats now reply to the Republicans, and we heard earlier McCarthy say that they're in a room talking right now, but it appears that at least McCarthy is not in that room, and neither is Hakeem Jeffries. It's got to be their staff that's negotiating. I suppose we can expect the staff to negotiate until there's no time left.
Now, will they negotiate over the Memorial Day weekend? That'll be a test.
I think, you know what? It's just like when you're a senior banker, right? Do you work on a deck over the Memorial Day weekend? No. But do you have a whole bunch of staffers doing it? Yes, of course.
I mean, the Eastern Shore of Maryland's right there. Some great beaches right by the, so some good stuff.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be an awesome weekend.
All
But speaking of that, let's get back to HTC right now. We're talking to Dan O'Brien. He's the president of the Americas. And he's talking to us about technology that his company has developed and is using. We keep thinking of the metaverse as the future, but this is where professionals are participating in it now. Dan, what do you do with the actual product? If you want to say help a brain surgeon practice surgery, do you sell a box of these things to,
like the Department of Columbia University,
or a university, or do you have them come in and work with you? How do you do it?
So we actually have multiple models, but the most popular model is when another company, we have companies like Mind VR, we have XR Health, we have multiple surgical partners. Those companies are actually integrated inside of these hospitals, or integrated inside of, we have surgical theater. They're integrated inside.
So what, they write the software for your hardware?
That's right. And then they will actually integrate and actually put that solution inside of the hospital. We will promote that solution. It could be a very specific SKU, or we could actually put together a SKU that has a lot of different types of training materials on it and simulations on it that works across multiple areas of the company.
All right, I feel like I know what a SKU is, but I don't really know what a
sorry.
SKU is.
Well, that's just a boxed version of the product. So when they open that product, that's what it actually is.
It's a stock keeping unit.
That's right.
Yes.
SKUs from the days of retail.
Thank
Give us your sense of the future of the VR headset. What's it look like now? What are its capabilities now, and how do you see that evolving going forward?
So, like, even our latest XRE Elite headset that we just launched a few months ago, this is a wearable headset that fits on the front and the back of your head. And it's still larger and a little bit bulky, but you can actually take the back off and have it in glasses-only mode. It's about the same weight as an iPhone. So very comfortable, light, and easy to use. In the future, where we are going is we're going to integrate 5G technology, just like a smartphone, into these wearable glasses. And you will have a connected product that is actually connected to a private network. It could be Bloomberg's private network, as well as, a public network. And I think then you will start to see what we call that hockey stick scale in terms of consumer adoption. But right now, we are very much in business professional use case, similar to smartphones. I was one of the original guys making smartphones, well before iPhone and well before Android phones, and I worked on the original Android phone. Now, like how that went in terms of adoption, we started with professional. We started with those professional use cases. We brought value to those customers, efficiencies, cost savings, and then we actually brought it into consumer once we actually brought in the consumer.
Where are we on that timeline, do you think, for like a real consumer? And will it be a brand that we know?
Well, I think Apple coming in is going to be a great addition to the market, right? It's endorsing to the market, but they're going to start with professional as well. They're going to start with professional creatives as well. I think
Are you going to compete with, so is HTC going to compete with Apple and whatever Oculus Rift is now?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we consider all of us, very worthy rivals. We're all trying to remove hurdles from the industry for that mass adoption, and we're all approaching it differently, which is great.
That's what I figured. You're aimed at probably a different customer segment than maybe
right.
Tim Cook is.
Yeah, and I think, we're looking at customers that this is a product that we can sell, that they will bring in, that they will save money. They will save time, efficiency. We look at companies like Bell Helicopter. It normally takes them 5 to 7 years to prototype a new helicopter. They did it in 6 months and saved over $100 million. We're using it with architecture and construction firms. We're looking at those different ways that we can actually bring massive value now. And then we look at, okay, great, let's integrate this scaling technology like 5G technology into these headsets. And quite honestly, we're one of the only companies in the world that can actually do that.
Awesome.
Yeah, great stuff. All right, we appreciate it. Dan O'Brien coming into our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Dan O'Brien, he's the president of the Americas for HTC, talking about Meta and the metaverse, more importantly, and virtual reality, augmented reality, all that good stuff.
Yeah, the hardware that comes with that. By the way, speaking of that, NVIDIA is coming out with earnings right now.
Wow,
and
look at that.
Wow, knocking the cover off the ball as far as the market's concerned. Remember, they were down during the regular trading day. The stock is now jumping 12% after second quarter revenue outlook, the outlook for second quarter revenue beat what the street was looking for. So let me go ahead and take you through the numbers from the start right now. Talking about the first quarter, that's the quarter they were reporting for. They had revenue of $7.19 billion. That beat the estimate for $6.5 billion. So on the sales side, they already beat. In terms of the bottom line, the adjusted EPS was $1.09 a share. That also beats the street's estimate of 92 cents a share pretty handily. And then the gross margin, 66.8%. The estimate was for 66.6%.
But look at the guidance, Matt. NVIDIA sees second quarter revenue $11 billion plus or minus 2%. The estimate was $7.18 billion. That is what the
There's
kids
the
call.
cover gone.
Yes, that's what the kids call a blowout guidance number, and that's kind of what driving the stock up 12%. So, boy, we were saying that this stock had to deliver in terms of its financial results to justify a 108% move year to date. I would say they did that.
It looks like they did that and then some. All right, let's go right now to Charlie Pellet. He's got your world and national news. Charlie?
Thank you very much. And here's what's going on in terms of what happened on Wall Street today. The S&P fell 30 points. That was a drop of about 0.7%. The S&P ends today's session at 4115. The Dow down 255, a drop there of 0.8%. Nasdaq down 76, a drop there of 0.6%. The focus, as you guys were talking about, after hours, NVIDIA shares surging 12% after hours. We also heard from Snowflake. Its sales forecast missed estimates. 10-year yield 3.74%, with the 2-year 4.37%. Gold down $16 the ounce to $19.58, drop there of 0.8%. And West Texas Intermediate crude today up 1.4%, $73.92 a barrel. One more check of NVIDIA after hours. The stock now up by 14.5%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Front and center here is the debt ceiling issues. We're getting down to the short strokes here. We got a lot of politicians grabbing the microphone whenever they can, trying to give their side of the story, but there's also the market response. So let's check in on that. Chris Anstey, senior editor for Bloomberg News, joins us on Zoom from our Boston bureau. And Liz McCormick, chief correspondent for Global Macro Markets, joining us on Zoom from New York City. Liz, let's start with you here. We see in the very short end of the curve, people there are definitely saying, hey, I'm concerned about this debt ceiling issue and some of the repercussions. Maybe not so much in the equity markets, but on the short end of the curve, they're certainly paying attention. What are you seeing?
Yeah, wow. Who thought we'd see 7% bill rate, right? And that's what they were trading. Bills that mature on June 1st are at 7%. People are getting worried. You know, it's like everybody's base case is, oh, we're going to get a deal in the final hour. But as that final hour gets closer and closer and we don't, I think the marketplace is saying, well, I am just going to stay away from buying securities that mature anywhere near that risk time where Janet Yellen may run out of the ability to pay the bills. So that's what's happening. Definitely the fixed income market in the short end is worried.
All right, Chris, let me ask you about the possibility or the, I guess, the scenarios that could play out here. If we do end up in a situation where Treasury has to make choices, how messy is that? Can they easily choose to say not pay federal employees but still cover interest payments, or is it something that's more difficult?
Yeah, so Matt, you know, we're in the realm of game theory here. So Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, as was the case with all of her predecessors in similar occasions, has no incentive to spell out, okay, here's our contingency plan. She has every incentive to say it will be a disaster if we go past the X date and run out of sufficient cash to make all payments. And what she and previous Treasury secretaries have said is that the Treasury's computer system, its accounting system, its logistics are not set up to prioritize some payments over other payments. Now, that said, close watchers of the Treasury almost universally assume that they would indeed start to prioritize some things. First of all, first and foremost, interest and principal on U.S. Treasury securities. This, as you know, is the bedrock of global finance. There is trillions of dollars worth of contracts around the world that are based off of treasuries. You don't want to have an accident here. And in fact, we even saw in minutes of the Federal Reserve's policy meeting earlier this week, released earlier today, that Fed officials were even starting to discuss this and the potential need to be ready to act if chaos breaks out.
Well, and one of the guys who works at the Federal Reserve was a previous employee of Treasury, right? And he was instrumental in helping to explain to everyone in 2011 that this wasn't going to be a clean deal, that it was going to be messy if it exploded. I'm talking, of course, about Jerome Powell. He knows firsthand, doesn't he, Chris, how the sausage is made at Treasury?
He sure does. He was also there in the room as a Fed board member in 2013 when they went through the detailed menu of options for the Federal Reserve to intervene in markets, if the Treasury didn't keep current on Treasuries. Now, that said, the assumption even at the Fed in 2011 and 2013, including Janet Yellen, who by then at that time was vice chair, was that the Treasury would indeed prioritize payments on Treasuries. One of the other big ones is Social Security. There's about 66 million recipients of Social Security payments every month. That one is awfully difficult to prioritize. But again, the assumption would be you've just got to prioritize those folks. I mean, who wants to be, on the back end of ire of millions of Americans not getting those crucial payments?
66 million people get Social Security.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not good politically. That's not good politically.
Not good.
Hey,
Not
Liz,
good.
explain to me how a downgrade of the United States government happens. I'm envisioning, some analyst sitting in her cubicle and she's got her spreadsheet open of the United States government, all the cash coming in, the cash going out, and she says, uh-oh, we got a problem on June 5th or 6th, and do I go put a downgrade note out for my clients to read? I mean, how does it work?
Well, I'll talk to that, but let me say Mom and Dad Capo are getting those Social Security payments, so we don't want to miss them. So the rating agencies, of course, they never just flying off the cuff here. They all have clear plans on what would be a downgrade. Like Chris said, many of them assume prioritization would happen, but they don't all agree what that means. Like, for example, Moody's says for them, a downgrade would be, point blank, if the Treasury were to miss an interest or principal payment on U.S. debt, like Chris was saying, so crucial to the whole marketplace and the functioning of the financial system. But if they, not that it's a good thing, but if they prioritize and maybe didn't pay Mom and Dad Capo for a while on Social Security and other things, but made good on those big debt holders, that's not a downgrade. It may not be great. They may, be, watching more closely. The outlook eventually could maybe change for some of these folks. But many of them, although some of the rating agencies say, hey, if you prioritize something and make good on one and not other, that's no good either. So there could be a downgrade, but they all have a set plan. So I think a lot of them will be just ready to push the button. Number one, if we miss a payment, first of all, if they go to prioritization. So they're kind of waiting and ready to go with their plans.
Chris, let me ask you, because we want Liz's parents to get their Social Security checks. They've paid in after all, so they deserve to get paid out. But at some point, doesn't this have to be changed drastically? Is there going to be a president or a Speaker of the House who has the cojones to actually do that?
Well, you would have thought that this would have got solved, after the 2011 occasion. And, if we go down to look at what happened in Australia after the global financial crisis, they actually had a debt limit in place. But then when the other party came in and the original party that put it in place started sniping about, oh, you're borrowing so much from the market. Oh, you're irresponsible. They just said, oh, forget it. We're getting rid of this thing. So, it would certainly make life a lot easier for investors, for Liz's parents, for my parents, but we wouldn't be on air discussing this and writing stories that are read by thousands of Bloomberg clients if it were repealed.
I would say here's the deal: you're not allowed to pass a budget unless you raise the ceiling to pay for that. Like in my house, if I decide, honey, I'm going to buy a new car, she's going to say, hey, either we don't have enough money or we're going to have to borrow to do it. And then it gets approved or disapproved by my wife.
By your wife. That's the way it should be in your household. Chris Anstey, thanks so much for joining us, senior editor, Bloomberg News, joining us on Zoom from Boston. Of course, Liz Capo-McCormick, chief correspondent for Global Macro Markets, joining us on Zoom from New York City. All right, right now let's head down to Washington, D.C. World and national news with Nancy Lyons.
Thanks, Paul. The White House is accusing House Republicans of manufacturing a crisis over raising the debt limit. Negotiators have been working behind closed doors this afternoon trying to find common ground. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says a default on the nation's debt would have catastrophic economic impacts for every part of the country.
We're talking about millions of jobs lost, devastated retirement accounts, and a recession.
Earlier today, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy sounded hopeful, but says Democrats must agree to spending cuts.
The off-ramp here is to solve the problem, to spend less than we spent last year. That's not that difficult. They still want to spend more. You cannot do that. No household would do that.
Both sides are trying to work out a deal before a June 1st default. Tina Turner, the Grammy Award-winning singer who endured an abusive marriage, cancer, and a stroke, and made it into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, she has died. She was 83. She won her first Grammy for this hit. Of course, that's Proud Mary. Her manager says Turner died at her home in Switzerland. Bells ringing 21 times in Uvalde, Texas, to honor the 21 lives lost 1 year ago today in a mass school shooting. Community leaders are asking for peace and privacy. Some families will be holding a public vigil tonight. President Biden used today's anniversary to call for more action on gun reforms.
We still need to ban, in my view, AR-15 firearms, assault weapons, once again. You know, they've been used time and again in mass killings of innocent children and people.
Biden says since Uvalde, there have been 650 mass shootings. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. NVIDIA shares surging after hours, up now by 18.4%. NVIDIA delivering a bullish revenue forecast for the current quarter, bolstering confidence that the world's most valuable chip maker can keep its business thriving by focusing on gear that powers artificial intelligence. Again, after hours, NVIDIA now up by 18.2%. But heading in the other direction, Snowflake, it delivered a sales outlook for the current quarter that fell short of expectations. The stock is down 12.3%. The quarter suggests that many companies are trimming their spending for cloud software amid uncertain economic conditions. So again, after hours, we've got Snowflake down by 12.6%. NVIDIA bears repeating, up now by 18.1%. It was a down day for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. We've got the S&P closing at 4115, down 30 points today, a drop there of 0.7%. The Dow lower by 255 points, down by 0.8%. NASDAQ down 76, a decline of 0.6%. 10-year yield 3.74%, with the 2-year 4.37%. Investors very much focused on any debt ceiling developments out of Washington. As for the inflation outlook and the potential for more rate hikes, Veronica Clark is economist at Citigroup Global Markets.
It certainly does come down to that stickiness that we're seeing in underlying inflation. You know, we are looking at core non-shelter services just like the Fed is, and those are stably strong at around 5% annualized. We have our own inflation forecast for the end of this year, a good bit higher than the Fed's latest forecast. We do think that means, you know, they will be raising rates again. We're penciling in another in June and even another in July.
And Meta Platforms employees got news today of the final round of previously announced job cuts, which affected thousands of workers in the company's business departments. Again, recapping, stocks lower today with the S&P down 30, drop there of 0.7%. NVIDIA beating estimates after hours, the stock now up by 18.5%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie Pell, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Well, Matt and I were talking about it before the earnings came out for NVIDIA, but this company better deliver because their stock is up at the point 108%. That really sets the bar high to deliver some results to support that. And I think they did that. They put out some very strong quarterly numbers, and then the most important aspect was some really, really strong guidance vis-a-vis expectations. Let's bring in somebody who knows a thing or two about this tech space. Dan Morgan, he's a senior portfolio manager at Synovus Trust Company. They got some shekels under management, about $21.9 billion assets under management. Joins us on the phone from Atlanta. So, Dan, there's a big leading tech player that really delivered this quarter.
Yeah, Paul, it was a very, very good number. And what really stands out isn't only the fact that they beat in terms of revenue and earnings on this most recent quarter, but the guidance that they gave for the upcoming quarter was a huge beat in terms of revenue expectations at $11 billion. I don't think anybody on the street had that number pegged for this upcoming quarter in terms of revenue. So, you know, one of the things, Paul, that's really interesting is, you know, we know NVIDIA has traded on the whole AI enthusiasm, let's say, right, with Microsoft, right? And this seems to me some evidence that we're starting to see some of this trickling down, especially in the data center group, because that came in at $4.28 billion. The estimate was $3.89 billion. And we know about 65% of the overall data center revenues come from some aspect of deep learning. So they're starting to show some evidence in these reports, opposed to just talking about AI. Wow. We're actually seeing some numbers coming and drilling down here in this print.
Hang on, repeat that, Dan. Did you say 68% of revenue from all the data center sales is part of large language models, basically?
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is just an estimate, but the estimate is about 65% of data center revenues. Let's say data center does about $15 billion this year, about $10 billion came from some various deep learning business. The rest coming from their networking business, which is Mellanox, if you know the company that they acquired a couple of years ago. So again, that's just an estimate, guys. But when you look at
huge,
these numbers, what I'm saying is we haven't had a lot of evidence in reports in the past that actually show that AI is actually impacting things. But when you look at this NVIDIA number, we know that NVIDIA was one of the first chip companies to really embrace AI before it became the big thing that it is, right? And now we're starting to come that kind of fruition in terms of actually seeing these figures. I mean, when these numbers came out, I just had to say, wow.
Yeah. We said the same thing here. And the thing is, Dan, I was looking at the PE this morning, and it was at 130 some odd times earnings. So it's a very richly valued company, and I was thinking, either earnings have to come up to the P or the P has to come down to the E, right? And it looks like, well, we know that the shares are soaring in the after hours, but this earnings report kind of changes my mind about this being an overhyped company. I mean, it's still a very rich valuation, but it looks like they're going to really move the E.
Yeah, you're right, Matt. And, obviously you're looking at a trailing multiple, and you never do that in Wall Street, right? You look at upcoming forward earnings estimates.
So 65.
Yep. Yeah, it's always based on what you can do in the next year, not what you did in the past. But, yeah, you're around 65, 70. It might have moved a little bit because the stock's up here this after hours. But in terms of fiscal year earnings estimates, but the stock, as you guys mentioned, had really traded up, right? We're up over 100% year to date, kind of anticipation of pretty good numbers, but I don't think anybody could have guessed that numbers would have come in this good. So I'm very encouraged by it.
So, Dan, one of the things, as a former investment banker, I'm always thinking about what companies should be doing with their capital and capital structure. And I look at a company like NVIDIA, again, trading at a super rich earnings multiple, so its stock is very valuable. No net debt on the balance sheet, $10 to $15 billion of free cash flow. What should this company do with their newfound wealth? Should they be out there buying something? Should they be selling some stock? I mean, what do you do here if you're this company?
Well, you make a good point, Paul, in terms of their ability to use that as equity to purchase other things. And, NVIDIA is a company, we talk about AI, but they're also involved, as you know, in other things. They're involved in the Omniverse. They're involved in automobile, electric vehicle. They have a lot of host of different things and applications that they're trying to get involved with. A lot of things they've done up to this point, other than the Mellanox deal, was internal, right?
Yeah,
They've been pretty driven internal. They haven't really been a big acquirer. Let's compare them to Broadcom, right? Complete opposite, right? Broadcom or Larry Ellison over to Oracle. All they do is buy up things and they acquire them and build them up and so forth. So, but you bring up a good point in terms of, would they be poised or positioned to maybe dabble into trying to even acquire some additional legs in their AI arm, you know what I mean, in terms of some smaller companies that they could acquire. I'm not talking of a big acquisition, but you bring up a good point that they're in a very good position in this space, especially when you compare it to their competition, right? AMD didn't really have a great report last, couple weeks ago. Intel's really struggling making that conversion into foundries. So NVIDIA is really in that top pole position right now.
And I would argue, Dan, I was just mentioning to Matt here, I think they have a relatively short window here when just all the stars are aligned for them. They are the AI play, at least for the moment, in this marketplace. And you take advantage of that somehow. I'm not sure. Maybe you just kind of...
It might not last.
It might not last. Maybe you just kind of play it for as long as you can.
Yeah, I mean, AMD came out with a new chip called the MI300. That's something they've been boosting as a AI chip. We know that Microsoft infused some capital in AMD a couple weeks ago to even produce and manufacture additional AI chips. So you're right. They've kind of got ahead of the game because they were in it first, and now that's starting to really come to light. But you're right. I mean, there's no doubt other companies are seeing this. And, I've noticed, Paul and Matt, is that a lot of the chip companies are promoting AI-based chips, but they're really just chips that they've had out in the market for a long period of time, and they're just kind of repackaging them and saying, oh, yeah, we can use these for AI. So it'll be interesting to see if companies like Alphabet or Apple and some of these other companies like Xilinx are going to start to come out with just specific chips that are dedicated towards AI. And then how does NVIDIA respond?
Dan, thanks so much for joining us. Pleasure having you on after these really this wow set of numbers. Dan Morgan is a senior portfolio manager at the Synovus Trust Company, talking to us about NVIDIA. And there is a lot to talk about there. As we said, the biggest gainer on the S&P year to date, up 109%. This is Bloomberg.
Company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. NVIDIA shares after hours, they're up now by 19.5%. Dan Morgan is senior portfolio manager at Synovus Trust, and he was interviewed moments ago right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
When you look at this NVIDIA number, we know that NVIDIA is one of the first chip companies to really embrace AI before it became the big thing that it is, right? And now we're starting to come that kind of fruition in terms of actually seeing these figures. I mean, when these numbers came out, I just had to say, wow.
Indeed, feeling in the studio as well. NVIDIA after hours up now by 19.8%, delivering a bullish revenue forecast for the current quarter, bolstering confidence that the world's most valuable chip maker can keep its business thriving by focusing on gear that powers artificial intelligence. Well, on a down day for the U.S. stock market, a lot of retailers are doing well today, very well. Kohl's soared after it reported reported a surprise profit and addressed bloated inventories in the first quarter. Early signs that its new CEO's efforts are paying off. Coal shares up today by 7.5%. Abercrombie & Fitch higher today after the company reported stronger than expected first quarter profit. It also boosted its outlook for the full year. Abercrombie & Fitch surged 31%. Heading the other direction, though, Petco Health and Wellness, it plunged today after earnings. We had Petco shares down today by just about 18.2%. Those are our top company stories at this hour, and this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
Matt Miller here in the Interactive Broker Studio with Paul Sweeney. We're filling in for Carol and Tim, and we hope we don't disappoint you.
No. Yeah, we got a lot of good stuff here today.
NVIDIA knocking the cover off the ball with it's already the best performer of the year on the S&P, and it's just fixing to get a whole lot better. I think it's up 12% in the aftermarket.
I mean, I was looking. This is a $755 billion market cap stock. It's not like a penny stock, and it's up, 108% before the aftermarket trading, which is another 19%. It's just and then you look at who owns this thing. It's all the big. Everybody's into this stock.
Man, I said 12%. Sorry, it's up 20% right now, up to 365 trading in the after-hours trade. Plus, we have this debt ceiling debate that it's probably not going to end until it has to, but that doesn't stop us from talking about it way too much.
No, and I say we get down to Washington, D.C. right now. Nancy Lyons, she's got world and national news, and she's got an update.
And I'm going to talk about it. Debt ceiling negotiations are locked on a classic problem that has vexed, divided, and disrupted Washington before. Republicans, led by House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, want to roll back federal government spending, while President Biden and other Democrats do not. Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen continues to urge the need to reach a deal by June 1st, even though she says it's hard to be precise. And what if the deadline is missed?
We're not involved in planning for what happens if there's a default.
Yellen was speaking at a Wall Street Journal event today and says a discussion on what kind of fiscal path is sustainable is a sensible way to deal with the problem. Members of Congress are proposing a code of conduct for the Supreme Court after learning that Justice Clarence Thomas accepted lavish vacations and other favors from a GOP donor. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman says now we're hearing from Chief Justice John Roberts on the issue.
Chief Justice John Roberts wouldn't testify to Congress on the proposal, but he made a brief comment to the American Law Institute.
I want to assure people that I am committed to making certain that we as a court adhere to the highest standards of conduct. We are continuing to look at things we can do to give practical effect to that commitment as an independent branch of government under the Constitution's separation of powers.
Justice Roberts and some of his colleagues previously spoke out to rebut the accusation that the court has become just another political branch of government. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Tina Turner, the Grammy Award-winning singer who endured an abusive marriage, cancer, and a stroke, and made it into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, well, she has died at the age of 83. Her manager says Turner passed away at her home near Zurich, Switzerland. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Paul and Matt.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Matt, I'm going to call out a story that I read on the terminal today, and you can get it on Bloomberg.com.